$100. You don't need $100 to just but again,
Thanks for
All the
they're trying to
rest
accept to
I'm
the
trying to
city.
register it.
And they're trying to become the phone yeah. So I stopped doing that here. Because we delay their way.
Are we ready to go?
May I extend a cordial welcome to each of you who is in attendance at this work meeting of the Provo City Municipal Council. We are met on Tuesday, September 15th, 2014. Time is 1:33. Meeting is recorded. It will be posted to the Provo City website. I invite Mr. Winterton, please, to the roll call.
Gary Winterton, Stephen Hales, Gary Sewell,
Hal Miller.
Brian Jones, Matt Taylor.
Louise Stevenson.
I'm informed that Mr. Van Buren will not be with us today. We trust that Ms. Santiago and Eric will arrive in good time. We're delighted to welcome Sergeant Kent Huntsman of the Provo City Police Department, who has kindly consented to provide the opening prayer and to introduce himself and introduce us to some of his duties.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day and our many blessings. We're thankful for your watching care over us and the care for our city. This time we're thankful for this opportunity that Council has to come together for this meeting and ask that you would bless them, that they would be able to make good decisions on behalf of our city and be able to carry out the tasks that they set forth to do today. We're thankful for our country, the freedoms that it affords us, and ask that you'll continue to bless it, that we might be able to continue these freedoms. Heavenly Father, keep us safe, free from harm, and help us to do the things that are right. This we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. As far as introductions, I'm Sergeant Kent Huntsman with the Police Department, and I have a very unique position within the Police Department in that, coming from a patrol background, I took over the ancillary services for patrol, or the special teams for patrol. So unique to my position is being a supervisor over our traffic and motors unit, as well as our civilian parking unit, our animal control unit, and the patrol canine program. It's rather taxing in that area in and of itself. So additionally, I get to participate in our Metro SWAT unit, which is a combined unit with Orem Police, Brigham Young University, and UVU University, as well as be part of our firearms training staff at the Police Department. So wear many hats. That's why the dome is flipped. So probably my funnest experiences, or what makes me more, I think what was the question? It was, what do I like best about working for the city? Is this diversity? I've fulfilled several jobs and positions throughout the police department, from patrolman to detective, patrol sergeant, community-oriented policing sergeant, and all of it pointing in the direction of the diversity of our city. Attending meetings like this, seeing things in the works, is always been interesting, and hopefully from our perspective we can do our part to make what you're wanting to come to the forefront and come together. So it's my privilege to be here and to give you indications this morning, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there questions? Comments?
Sure.
You mentioned that canine control is one of your
Yes, ma'am.
busiest. What, is there anything that as council we can do to help that? Is that something that's just, it is what it is, or is it?
We're actually working on like a regional training park or dog park. Dogs are big in Provo City, and in Parks and Recs department, we looked for a specific training area where we could hold region training, where we're somewhat combined in a metro concept with Orem Police. Orem Police has several canines. We had 2 patrol canines and 2 EOD canines. Be able to have an area where those could be trained, and then also do public awareness, dog licensing, things that segues into animal control or pet management, that type of thing. We're looking into, and things are coming to the table. Things are working out good there. It's just a matter of progression. As money and or opportunities arise, we're just wanting it to continue to grow. I mean, ultimately, from a field supervisor standpoint, I'd love to have 6 or 7 dogs. Our dogs are universally trained, or what they call dual role trained. So they're for apprehension of man, protecting criminal issues, as well as narcotics. We have single source dogs that are explosive ordnance detection and things of that nature, for like in schools or big civic events, things of that nature. So anytime you could grow that, it's an awesome opportunity for the city. So as opportunities arise, or you come across opportunities out there in the political world that would assist us in that, that would be awesome. That's ultimately one of our goals, is to grow it.
You heard the mention of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Thank you.
Should be sharing that.
At what point in your life did you know that law enforcement was for you, may I ask?
Probably 3 years old. I have brothers that are, I'm the youngest of 5 brothers and 2 sisters. 4 of my brothers were in law enforcement or military service. So it was one of the many things I wanted to do. It was a toss-up between the fire truck and the police car, and I seemed to like the police car better. So.
And did you come to this position with the city from a military background?
No, I was a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense, as well as industrial business in the hazmat world. And I was always working with city, state, county government, and thought it would be interesting to be a part of that.
So it's an impressive background for what you're doing now, and for the diversity that you alluded to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
I call for a motion to approve the minutes of the September 2nd, 2014 work meeting. Mr. Hales, thank you for that motion. Second, Mr. Sewell, thank you. All in favor? The vote is unanimous with Mr. Buren and Mr. Garrett excused. Now we turn to a report update on the status of the Provo Bus Rapid Transit Project. This to be presented by Janelle Erickson Robertson.
It's just Robertson now.
And Hugh Johnson and Mr. Turner. All of them with us. So please.
John Higgins from Utah.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins.
So we've just been working fast and furiously since we last presented here to give you an update on several items, as you know, on the Provo project. So we just wanted to give you an update of where we are right now, where we think we're heading over the next several months, and just kind of give you an overview of that and then answer any questions you might have.
Janelle just sent us a clicker right there.
Oh, awesome.
Sir. Thank you.
And which way? That one?
Yeah. It's not working.
Green. You want to move? Or you can vacuum over? Oh,
Wherever there's a
oh, vacuum's gonna help. Okay.
Now we test it.
Oh, okay. There we go. So since the last environmental document was published, as you know, we made some changes to the project in response to public comment and concerns. And mainly in the BYU area. Is this also a, oh, it is, okay. BYU area, we took away the exclusive lane on 900 East. We moved the stop over to 900 North instead of being on 900 East. And we added a station at the NTC, as you know. So this is the new map as it's shown in the environmental document as it's moving forward now. That puts us at 18 stations on the project. That's actually 25 platforms when you consider the side stations where there are no exclusive lanes. And there are also two other components to the project that we haven't talked about a lot. We've been studying it and moving it forward, but that's UDOT's improvements to the project and then also the expansion of our Timpanogos business unit facility. In order to accommodate all the new buses for the system, we need to expand that facility because it currently doesn't have enough capacity to handle all of that. So the UTA portion, just the transit portion, that's including the buses and the Timpanogos facility, we're right at $149.9 million for the project cost. And then UDOT is also making improvements of about $36.5 million or so. And we'll kind of go over what all of their improvements are as well since we finished up the study. So this is the map of UDOT's improvements, mainly on University Parkway. You know, they're adding 2 auto lanes down the length of the diagonal area there. And then they are adding left turn and right turn pockets at these various intersections, plus 300 South on University Avenue. And we just want to do that as one joint construction project that saves the traveling public the delay in construction and costs as well. So we move all the curbs once and all the poles once and make it a much more efficient project that way. This is just, this is our basically the layout of our current facility at Timpanogos, and then these are the things we're going to expand in order to be able to handle the new buses. This facility is over on Geneva Road in Orem, or just west of the intermodal center there. We already own all the property. We'll just be okay. It was working. Okay.
Is that working?
Huh?
Is that working?
Well, that one's working too. I don't know. Oh, anyway, so we're adding, new fueling farm and tire shop and all that kind of stuff, but this will be an expansion of that facility as well. It's just kind of the stats of the project and what you've seen this before, but just the improvements from the current route to the future route and the time savings and the ridership.
So I do have a question about that one. Is that showing University Avenue? Is that a cross section?
Just cross section. This is University Parkway. This is just an example, but
I know a lot of folks in the community have expressed concern about the loss of trees on University Avenue.
yeah, and we'll get to some of that. We'll actually move into that next year. Well, to talk about 930s first, if that's okay, just because it's the order. So, as you know, we've had the 2 working groups in Provo. One is the BYU area, the 900 East area working group, and then there's the downtown Provo area working group. We took some of the comments from the 900 East area and the BYU area of what could be done with 900 East to make it a better street for the neighborhood area, given that the buses will be driving on that street, and that it's a busy street in general and needs some improvements. And so we've worked with the city and worked with that working group on some ideas that would be acceptable concepts to progress. This just shows the existing roadway. It has the center turn lane and then the 2 auto lanes. And then the city's working toward having the 10-foot path in most areas. It's not completed all the way along it. And then working on that on the other side as well. And then these are just some perspectives looking down what that street looks like right now. And then we had a landscape architect. At this phase in design, we don't typically have landscaping plans yet, but we just had a landscape architect give a concept plan to give us some ideas of what we can progress into the next phase of design. One of the things that that working group came up with was this driveway that could be implemented along the houses that are on the east side of 900 East to buffer them from the traffic on 900 East. And so instead of doing the 10-foot path in front of their houses there would be an entrance back here to enter into their driveway areas, and then put a sidewalk on this side of it, and then a landscape buffer where the current power poles are.
Is there room for that? In certain places there isn't, is there?
Well, this is just the one block.
The one, it's a one block, okay.
Yeah, it's not along the entire corridor. It would be just where those houses are on that 900 East area.
So you're to Fur. And then as you get closer to Fur, it would come out right before that home that's, and there are a couple homes that are almost to the road.
And then the other idea is to add a center landscape median where the current kind of free left turn area, or what some people call suicide lane, is, and put in a landscape buffer in there to kind of make the street look a little nicer, maybe slow it down a little bit. We keep all the existing lanes of traffic, and then wherever there's a left turn pocket, the landscape median would go away so that the left turns could still be made at the intersections, but that there would be a landscape median down the center of the road as well. And these were concepts that the city engineering staff felt comfortable with, and the working groups ideas. And so these are the ones we'll try to move forward and progress into the next phase of design.
And I know the neighbors were really happy about that, having the lane and the path too.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like the idea of the path without the lane, but having
good.
both and being able to back out of their driveway without worrying about bikes and pedestrians and stopping traffic. We're excited about that. So.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions about this concept? I know it's not a detailed design yet.
Gary, in response to your question, though, it will take some additional right away.
It will be a little bit of right
It's
away, yes.
wider than just the 10-foot path.
But my understanding is it's maybe a matter of 3 feet in that area.
And it's, it sounds like the neighborhood might even be glad to do that to get that easier out.
Right, yeah. And I guess the city actually owns a lot of the right of way, even though it looks like it's their front yard. The city actually owns the majority of that right of way, so it wouldn't be a significant taking on that. So this is just another perspective that kind of shows the how the landscape buffer might work, and then having some pedestrian improvements in that area. So we need to go to the folder and show the other images. Don't ask me why, but they would not go into my presentation. So there was a folder on the desktop on the top right there. Yeah, so those other 2 images that are in that folder?
Oh, that was the one?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, those 2 images. Maybe this is why it wouldn't go in my presentation. I can open it on my computer. I have no idea. With the downtown working area group, we really kind of focused on that give and take, because there's only so much right of way in that area between the sidewalk, the landscaping, the trees, the parking, the right turn pockets, and then also bike lanes. Has been, kind of all of the competing interests that are in that one corridor. So we're gonna have to continue to work on the details of, how we implement this and what's most important. And we're bringing more and more people into that. We've gotten the city forester on board. He is going through and doing an inventory of all the trees on the corridor, and not just University Avenue, but all the other streets that BRT is going to be on in the city. Determining, the life of the tree, whether we think it can be relocated. Is it near step anyway? Is it an undesirable tree? Doing an inventory of all the trees in the corridor and making his suggestions as to, what we should do with some of them. That will help drive some of the details of the design. Some of the areas, if we're taking out landscaping on the side, we proposed in all the shadows of all the stations will have landscaped areas like these. This is it's kind of a quick photo rendering of what a median would look like in the center right there, and we could plant trees in that center median to kind of make up for where they're maybe not going to be on the sides. Also incorporating them into the bottom of the station, you can't see it here, we'll also have a taper down to make the lanes back to normal width as well. And that can be landscaped. We took some of the people from your working group on a tour of what we did on the airport line, university line, showing even in small spaces what you can do with landscaping to improve the corridor. So it really is a responsibility of the project that if we're taking out something, that we need to try to replace it to the level, try to replace it to the level of what's out there now. Some cases, like on North Temple, the businesses paid for the upgraded landscaping, but there wasn't any landscaping out there in the first place. So it was an upgrade versus us trying to come in and replace what's being taken out.
So it appears that there are no left turn lanes where you go from University Avenue onto Center Street at the intersection of University and Center. Is that right?
I believe that was a location that we had worked with the city staff and determined we wanted to eliminate left turns.
How about right turn lanes? I know that those become even more controversial when we're talking trees and stuff.
Right, so UDOT is working with Terry Newell and our team with all of the analysis we did on traffic and the city is working with them to determine, where are those right turn pockets really, really critical, for the amount of traffic volumes that are there. And so they're taking another look at that and determining that. Maybe you can speak more to what you guys are doing with that, John.
Basically, that's what we're doing. Still studying, we need to get some numbers, made some preliminary cuts of which ones could go away, which ones needed to stay, and then just doing some refining numbers, seeing that they will come.
We can design this in a way, that we keep all of the existing landscaping, or we need to replace it in some places, but then you have an inconsistent landscaping, down the street, where this could be an opportunity to completely rebuild the street entirely, have a consistent tree, a consistent type of landscaping, consistent widths and pockets and that kind of stuff that could, really, beautify the street. Maybe if it isn't, the exact number of mature trees that you had before, but it would be building toward a whole brand new landscaped system for the long term.
As I talked with Ty about this also, he is really concerned, Ty, our forester, he's really concerned about the lifespan of a lot of those trees. And I like the idea of consistency, because as these trees start to die, we're going to start to get some strange things going on. And it might be this might be a time to look at that and replacing what we've got. Some of those trees are big and beautiful, and Ty knows each one by name, I think. So he's really concerned about them, but he's also concerned about the lifespan that they've already given us. So,
do you feel like it's going to be a net increase in the number of trees that we have in the downtown area by the time this is done?
I think it could be, or it can also be a lot of other types of landscaping too, because you guys only pretty much have trees where if you look in, you know, downtown, there are a lot of, you know, grass strip, not like grass like Kentucky grass, but, you know, tall grasses and some other stuff that looks very nice as well in this small area. So the overall landscaping, I think, could increase. But, you know, the number of trees may or may not, it just depends. Some of the ideas we had about the existing trees that are young enough to move is that if we did these landscape center areas, we could prep them and be ready for them. Take the trees from the side that need to be moved, put them in the center, and, you know, kind of come up with some creative plans to save those trees.
Because we haven't done a landscaping plan yet, it's hard to say.
Hard to
that we're
say
gonna
exactly.
Match equal to equal, but we do feel confident there are landscaping areas to do things. And like I say, we can provide variety, and we've been able to do a lot of things with our light rails over the last 5 years.
If you understand sort of the sensitivity,
Right,
there's a lot of sensitivity in that downtown area, that those trees are going to be going away along the side. So if it can be.
I think they can be
add
replaced.
trees, you can replace them, add to them, so that the net is an increase rather than.
I think so with the center median areas too, that we could probably try to find ways to increase the amount of landscaping that's
I
out there.
realize it's very tight along the sidewalks, but that's where people enjoy the trees because it provides some shade as they're walking up and down.
Yeah. You know, and it's gonna be that balance, just like Gary was saying, the city forester says, you know, we could go through all the effort of saving a couple of those and then have them die in 5 years and wish that whole area had been re-landscaped to match the rest of it.
If they could just be re-landscaped, I think that's satisfying.
Yeah.
You take something down to put another one up.
Yeah, we absolutely have no intention of making, I mean, one thing that Bill Knowles has been trying to do, our business liaison, has been really trying to send the message that, you know, we don't generally leave corridors worse than they were before, we make them better. You know, we've gone in and we've done what's right to make the corridors, you know, beautiful again, and if you guys are interested in doing a tour of what we've done on some of our projects, I don't know, I think it was really, really helpful for some of the business owners to see it, what we've done, and we'll be happy to do that for you and show you what some of the creative ideas and some of the things that we've done, and you can make really nice landscape areas that don't have to be huge if you don't have a lot of room.
To return to Mr. Whittington's point, the forester also informed us that the reason for this truncated life expectancy for the large mature trees is because of the base in which they were originally planted.
Yeah.
And that's bringing this premature end, if you will, to their lives. But by taking the kinds of careful preparations you have outlined, we may very well see trees extended.
Yeah, we really want to work on a plan with him.
We've learned a lot over some of our light rail projects to design trees to live in an urban environment with, you know, we actually put air tubes down into the root system that have caps on top so they can actually get the air down into it. You know, how do you control the roots so they don't push up sidewalks and we keep them contained? And so there's a lot of neat things that are going on with, you know, different types of urban tree grades and how we can do that. So
it's been really interesting for me. I've made a concerted effort to go and talk with businesses about the trees and the parking issues that are dealing with this, and there is a split. It's not, you used to talk with the businesses and they say, don't touch my parking. And then you start to explain to them, well, maybe we're going to have to lose a tree or two. Sometimes they don't realize that there's got to be the give this or this. They doggone it, we all want it all, don't we? And I'm seeing a lot more interest in, okay, well, let's talk trees and landscaping rather than just my 2 parking spots in front of my business.
Thank you.
Do you have any more kind of questions about how?
So the completion date is still 2016?
End of 2016, yeah, that's the plan so far. We can kind of move on to the next slide. We'll talk about where we're going.
just got it up on.
Oh, it's on that one now. Yeah, I forgot I wasn't on PowerPoint anymore, sorry.
Okay.
Can't remember what I put in it now anyway. That's where we're supposed to be. So, just kind of an overview of what we've been working on since our last update. We've been working on the environmental assessment. It's going a little slower than we anticipated, but that's at FTA's discretion, not ours, so we're just, following with them. They have the document right now for their final review. We're hoping that the public comment period will be October, November timeframe. It's all going to be a matter of how many comments and when they come back from their final review.
How do people comment? Public comment.
Yeah, so we'll send out information about how to comment. We'll send out information in everyone's utility bills. It'll be advertised in the paper. And we'll either have locations. Last time we had them at a couple elementary schools and the city library, informing people of where they could go pick up the physical documents if they want to review them, or they can review the document online and comment online as well. So all the details of that haven't been, part of that's going to depend on what FTA would like us to do as well. So all the details of that aren't fully determined yet. We'll have to wait till they come back with their final comments and how they want us to advertise it. But typically it's a paper notice is the requirement. And then the small start submittal, we got it in last week. All of our templates and all the information that's been going on in the project thus far. It was a stack of paper probably this big, but it's in, and we'll be awaiting their comments. They have what they call a project management oversight consultant doing a readiness review of the project right now, determining if we have, everything in order and if, we know what we're doing and we can implement the grant. We have enough information about the project to move forward. So they're doing that right now. That will probably be finalized mid-October sometime. We should know whether or not we'll be recommended for funding in most likely November timeframe after that readiness review. And then hopefully we'll be in the president's budget in February, March next year for the grant. And then this was the agreement with the county is when they would then bond for the local match portion of the project. With the design work, our preliminary design is almost done. It may have seemed like, well, we were doing all this design work, but we didn't really, see what exactly they were doing. This phase of design, they're really doing all the survey information, utility information, gathering all that kind of information. There's not a lot of hard design work that's done in this phase of the project, but we've got a lot of information, anything that would be a fatal flaw to the project. So we've got all the information now. The city has seen the preliminary designs. The staff has reviewed them. It's, like I said, it's mostly general layouts right now. It's not details of which tree or what landscaping at this point. UDOT completed their corridor study, which determined where they were going to make their capacity improvements, as you saw in the University Parkway map that I showed earlier. We'll start the stakeholder working groups again once we get another designer on board. So we have to go out for procurement again for our final designer as required from the feds. It could be Lochner, it could be another company. There are several that will bid on that design work. And then that's when we'll pick up those working groups again to continue the work that we've been doing with them. And we continue to coordinate with UDOT on, the right turn pockets and whatever else, what other stuff that's going to come up over the next several months as well. That really isn't going to stop. And now we're preparing all the documents for a bid for a final designer. So it's all the stuff that's going on right now. And then this is kind of our master schedule for the project. I talked about a lot of this stuff that's been going on over the last few months. This is getting our final designer started at the first of the year. We're doing a procurement of the vehicles and delivery and that kind of stuff is happening right now as well. Our contractor that will ultimately construct, this is for UDOT's improvements and our the actual BRT project, and then this is the bus facility. securing a contractor to do that as well, and then hopefully opening end of 2016, first of 2017. I think that's all. Any other questions or?
Do you have a design of the 700 North Road, or is it
Oh.
just minimal impact on that? So,
Yeah, you know, I didn't bring that. We have concept designs that we could show you. We actually bring them to the working group 1 area. We haven't seen them before. We can send those out and show you what they look like.
great. Would you please send them to Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, do that.
I had a question about 300 South is being redeveloped. UDOT is working on that project, separate from the BRT project. It sounds like there's some intersection there where you're working on what was that, left turn, did you say? A right turn when you were showing?
What are you guys adding in?
Well, with BRT, we're having to do a southbound to eastbound double left because of the traffic. You know, it backs up there quite a bit at night. And then the 300 project is working with the city staff to accommodate the desires of the city to have a path on the north side. So we're working that, depending on the schedule, we're going to try to make that intersection constructed at one time. We've had some issues with some environmental concerns in that corner, so we're trying to work through those.
You know, a constituent contacted me, and I emailed the mayor, and he replied back. They're concerned that the left turns are being eliminated on 1st, 2nd, 3rd east, on 3rd south. And I think the first left turn you can make would be on 4th east. And there's a lot of traffic that goes to that county building complex on 2nd east. The people, especially on 4th east, are worried that that's going to be unbearable for them. They feel like maybe by making some design adjustments, it might affect the bike lane, plan for that. But that there could be left turn signals there. I'm sure the mayor probably has a better idea of what the process would be to ensure that. That we with city staff, UDOT.
You know, I've got an email out. I can't remember if I come back to you on it or not, about trying to get together for a meeting on Wednesday, if they're available. We've actually had another group of residents with that same concern we've been meeting with. They're trying to work for the modeling the traffic. In your case, you may have an idea of what to see. It's kind of, this sounds like a familiar thing to the council, where we've been working on it for several years. All of a sudden, a group that pops up that wasn't paying attention is now paying attention. And I guess, good news, bad news is we're waiting for funding, so we have a little bit of time to work on some of their concerns.
I can point your concerns out to the project manager of that project, so he's aware of your concerns. I'm sure you, Mayor, talking to Terry.
And I used to have a sort of group.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Turner, Mr. Henderson, more than two issues. No, thank you very much. Appreciate the extensiveness of your preparations. We'll now turn to Mr. Garrett is with us. Welcome, Mayor Curtis, Deputy Mayor Martin.
Kim Santiago also just joined us, I think, since we mentioned last.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mumford, please, for a discussion on a joint resolution for support of thorough research regarding the sale of Tier 3 gasoline and other possible air quality enhancements.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of council.
At the, the last meeting, there was a joint resolution that was brought before you, and due to some concerns over some of the facts that were asserted in the document, and the fact that we weren't really sure we wanted to move forward with that, staff went back and has revised the resolution in addition to going back and just kind of clarifying where some of the facts that were asserted in the document came from. And we've modified it to, instead of calling for timely sale of the Tier 3 gasoline, to ask the state legislators to thoroughly review the Tier 3 gasoline standards and adopt them if it looks like they're accurate. And so I went through and did a little bit of my own independent research and wanted to report a little bit of that information to you. Most of the information that was in the document came from the EPA's document where they talked about the Tier 3 standards that would be adopted nationwide in 2017. And according to the EPA, if the Tier 3 standards are adopted in 2017, by 2030, the annual monetized health benefits will be between $6.7 billion and $19 billion per year. Further, annual statistics nationwide, it will prevent 770 to 2,000 premature deaths, prevent 2,200 hospital admissions and asthma-related emergency room visits, prevent 19,000 asthma exacerbations, and prevent 30,000 upper and lower respiratory symptoms in children, and prevent 1.4 million lost school days, work days, and minor restricted activities per year. And so I want to see if Utah has taken any action on this. And in 2013, actually, Governor Herbert asked Envision Utah, which is a public-private partnership that looks at ways in which we can grow in a sustainable manner, to review ways in which we can get cleaner air. And they came back and produced a report that had a lot of information that they had actually gone out and verified on their own. They didn't source where that information came from, but they produced a report and sent it to Governor Herbert. And basically some of the things that they found was that Tier 3 gasoline costs are expected to increase on average between 1 and 8 cents was their estimate. They said that cars that efficiently use Tier 3 gas are mostly produced after 2013. And there are some cars that have better standards that are pre-2013, but all cars starting in 2013 have to have these Tier 3 standards where they can use that Tier 3 gasoline better and in a more productive manner. And so those will cost on average $135 more than the current two-tier cars. They also talked about the possibility that even with the 2017 adoption of Tier 3 standards, that unless Utah adopts this Tier 3 sulfur standard, that there's a chance with the averaging that's allowed as a part of the move by the Obama administration that Utah refineries wouldn't have to produce Tier 3 gasoline. They said there's a chance altogether that could skip Utah because of the averaging that's allowed as part of the mandate in 2017. And with both vehicle and fuel working together, they estimate that Tier 3 standards would reduce in 2017, if they were adopted, local emissions by 5 to 10%, and in 2030, as more cars are able to use this gas in a more efficient way, up to 25 to 30%. And since local emissions, 57% of local emissions are caused by vehicles, they consider that the most feasible working strategy to reduce air emissions that they have. And so, finally, Governor Herbert made his attention known that Tier 3 gas is what he would like to do in his State of the State address, and asked the Utah legislators to start working on it. Only one House joint resolution was proposed, which advocated the Utah Department of Environmental Quality and the Utah Air Quality Board to expedite measures to bring Tier 3 compliant motor vehicles and low sulfur fuels to Utah. That that resolution passed the House, but it failed in the Senate, and so it wasn't formally adopted. So that's where we are right now, I don't know of anything that's going on above and beyond that. So, but I wanted to bring that report to you.
Splendid report, thank you. Can you talk briefly about the revised resolution, the proposed resolution?
Sure. I put some of these, wherever I found the information from, I talked about who asserted that within the document, and the call is for the state legislators to look at Tier 3 gasoline, thoroughly examine it, and look for other possible air quality enhancements. And so that's the purpose of the joint resolution.
Are there any comments or suggested revisions to this draft?
Go ahead, Tim. You go ahead.
I wonder, you said the number of cars, or the cars in the county that are beyond 2013. Do we have a percentage of what that would look like? I mean,
That are older than 2013?
Yeah, older than 2013, you said would not really.
Well, there's some cars
by.
There's some cars that have those standards in place, but not all cars are required to be able to use that fuel in an efficient manner. And I didn't find any actual statistics about that, about how many cars are pre-2013 versus post-2013. But Envision Utah studies the only thing I had, and they estimate that the impact would be 5 to 10% reduction in emissions in 2017 with the vehicles that they estimate will be on the road at that point. And then by 2030, that'll be up to 25 to 30 is their estimation.
Have a couple of questions with, for a few years, will they have to have Tier 3 plus the other gas stations will have to provide both, or will the Tier 3 work on our pre-2013 cars?
It has some impact, not a whole lot. It's not as efficient as in post-2013 cars. And so there's expected to be a minimal impact in the reduction.
Similar to oxygenated fuel?
It's low sulfur fuel.
I mean, but will the impacts similar?
I don't know. I have to research that.
And you said that the Utah refineries might be exempt from this. As I look at some of these name brand gas stations, I hear from the name brand group, we're having a hard time competing with some of the local groups, the local refineries, and they say our gas is so much better than the local stuff. And we're having a hard time competing. Is that how will that affect if Utah doesn't do it, and some of these other local refineries, like the big name oil companies, will they be required to do it, and our Utah companies won't?
That's my understanding. Because there's an averaging system in place, some of these bigger refineries could produce the Tier 3 gasoline, and some of the smaller refineries.
So that could widen the gap as far as competitiveness between the local and the...
Essentially, we would get the same gas we have now. At least there's a possibility we would have the same gas we have now if the Tier 3 standards aren't mandated for Utah. And California has already mandated it, so they're already on that level 3 standard.
Have they seen the benefits?
I didn't actually research California. I just know they adopted them in the last couple of years. So I don't know what they've seen from them, but I could do some more research if that's what you like.
Mr. Sewell.
I think you may have just addressed my question, but just to make sure, sounds like with the older vehicles, the Tier 3 gasoline will work just fine, and there's some benefit in terms of emission reduction, but just not as much.
Right. It's not nearly as efficient. So.
Question is whether the revised joint resolution that is available to us now is sufficient for our purposes. If we don't pretend for a minute that this is some kind of scientifically astute document, we don't pretend to that kind of expertise. Rather, we're interested merely to signal our profound interest in a careful review of possibilities by the state legislature prior to their adopting legislation, perhaps. One would be the exploration of the feasibility implementation, and the other would be the fiscal consequences of that implementation. That should be obvious as constituting the kind of review we're interested in. If you consider what we have now, to be a sufficient statement with our encouragement, then we could move to accept that and transmit it to the administration, which then is to the legislature.
I propose that we do that. I think that it's a good recommendation. It has some statistics in there that we've heard that are of interest to us, but the encouragement is that they'll go through and, as you say, specifically and carefully look at. So I'm very pleased with it. I would like to recommend that we do consider it.
Thank you, and I note that the statistics included are documented, which is an improvement over the original, in my opinion, or the original draft. Any discussion on that motion? The second? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss it. When we send resolutions to the state legislature, do we not research it out ourselves and then give them, let them know this is what we would like to see happen and these are the reasons why? I don't know, I guess I feel like some of these things are helpful to have in here, but at the same time, there is a cost to the constituents. And by sending this resolution to the legislature, we are, in some ways, we are advocating for that. For that study, for the study, right.
But that doesn't imply in any way the adoption of legislation.
Just ask them to study it carefully. That's what, instead of us studying it, we're asking them.
I think we're in inadequate position necessary research.
That they would be in a position to do it where we're not.
They have a much wider range and depth of resources to call. Technical resources.
It's also their stewardship on our city to study.
And my other thought was just kind of along those lines that if this is sort of a nod toward looking to tier 3, is there anything to say that that maybe natural gas would be more plentiful, more abundant and cheaper and a better option, and more natural gas stations, making those more abundant? I mean, I guess my question is this the only thing that we feel would really help our air quality, or are there other things that we could propose to them at the same time?
Might I also make the point that they say that we want them to explore tier 3 and other possible air quality enhancements. So we're not just saying tier 3, we're saying other areas as well we'd like to look at.
Conversation, motion, second.
And one more thing, sorry, I have a lot of questions. So in all the medical things that they've stated, where did they get, you did a little bit of research on that, where did they get the medical, that was the EPA had those documents?
Yeah, it's in the first EPA document that I sourced in the document, and there's a link there. You can look it up. They don't really go into detail on how they got their statistics. This is just basically a fact sheet that they produced that talks about tier 3 gasoline, what it means really for the average American citizen and what impact it will have on their lives.
And this would be this is nationwide.
These are all nationwide statistics, right?
I appreciate in the resolution it says 1 cent per gallon rather than the 8 cents, which the EPA says it could be also. So I appreciate the fact that we're trying to keep this. We want you guys to keep this as low as possible. Keep it on that 1 cent as you study that. Make sure if it goes higher, then we come back and we talk about it.
This is, I think, very far-sighted improvements we made. Congratulations. Second. Mr. Smith, thank you. All in favor of the motion?
Clarification. Joint resolution, may I?
This is a resolution to forward the resolution to the administration where it becomes joint.
Okay.
It's on the council meeting.
So,
Yes.
I just remember the last joint resolution, a little bit of confusion about by expressing my support. So without a vote, I'll just, for the record, express my support, and then tonight.
Do the same.
Do the same.
Please make that note, Mr. Jorgensen. The motion passes unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. Thank you. Now to Mr. Dan Gonzalez. A discussion of locally targeted objectives for the allocation of federal block grant monies in the 5-year Provo City Consolidated Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Good afternoon, everyone. If I may just give you a little bit of a refresher. The city receives grants from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, DMV Home, and CDBG as an entitlement city. But in order to receive that funding, we have to provide HUD with a consolidated plan, which encompasses a strategic use of these funds for 5 years. The current plan expires this year, so the next 5-year consolidated plan starts in 2015. So in preparation for that, there are several things that we have been doing, and one of them is identifying locally targeted objectives for the use of these funds. If you remember, a few months ago, back in May, we came to you and we presented a chart with objectives that had been used in the past. We asked you to rank them and prioritize them in preference, and we followed up that with a memo that informed you what the ranking was on each one of those. And so of the documents that Minister just handed you out, that's the document, the draft shows those. At that meeting also, I think from your request, we went and asked citizens to provide some input. So we basically provided them with the same information we provided you. We held an open house, and we also did an online survey. Of those, a total of 83 respondents, we captured information from all of them. So on the first aspect, there's 3 aspects: decent housing, suitable environment, and economic, creating economic opportunities. So on the first one, here you see the responses from the council and from the citizens. In blue is how the citizens voted on those. I guess it's orange or yellow, I'm not sure what color you golden is the council responses. So what we did to rank these responses is we assigned a number to those that were ranked first. So if one of these you prioritize us first, we gave it a 4-point, and then went down 4, 3, 2, and 1 for the top 4. And we assigned the same value to the responses we received from the citizens. So that's decent housing. That's how it goes. You can see that some of them show pretty much the same as the council. Some others show a little bit of discrepancy from the citizens, a little heavier ranking than the council. The next one was suitable living environment. And then again, just a comparison of how citizens ranked those against how the council ranked those. Then again, for the most part of these, the 4 top objectives were pretty much in sync with the council. The next one is creating economic opportunities. And there again is the comparison. Now, something that I would like to make a point of is this is the first stage of the strategic plan. We're looking what kind of things do we want to do with the funding. We're not talking about who we're funding or how much we're funding. That's not part of the process right now. We did have a few respondents that confused our survey, thinking that that's what we were asking for, And so some of the responses where we like this so-and-so nonprofit to receive funding for this and this and that. We're not at that stage. Although I need to mention there were a few responses, a couple of responses that came back with that type of feedback. That will come later. So this is a combination of how it was ranked by for both the citizens and the council. So right here you can see the highest one was improving and maintaining neighborhood integrity through repair and rehabilitation of housing stock. The second one is supporting programs that work to educate low and moderate income households concerning home ownership. And third one, provide down payment and closing cost assistance to increase low and moderate income persons' access to home ownership, and so on. Again, this is a combination of the responses from both the council and the citizens. The next was suitable living environment. The top one here is the pink one, undertaking infrastructure projects in low and moderate income neighborhoods, followed by providing upgraded neighborhood facilities like parks, community centers, etc. Third one is assist in providing service to low and moderate income families with a at-risk youth. And fourth one, evaluate and provide appropriate funding for eligible historic preservation projects that meet national objective criteria, and the others. And then the last one, the creating economic opportunities. The top one, well, there's a little bit of a tie. You can see here the 17 and 17% between providing job creation through commercial facade renovation and assisting local businesses and entrepreneurs through mentoring and technical assistance. Sorry, that is the second one. The first one is 18%, providing technical assistance and recruiting businesses to vacant buildings in the central business district. I'm not reading correctly, right? 20% is higher than 18. Sorry, we found out, we thought we could rank them from top to the program didn't help that way. So 20, 18, and 17%. So the top one would be job creation and retention through the small business loan program. Okay, so from the exercise that you did as a council and from what we had with the citizens, that's basically where we are now. And so if you feel that this reflects what you want to put forward, then we can move on with that. If you want to have a discussion to rearrange some, we're open to suggestions or discussion. Mr. Gates.
I do think it might be worth having a discussion on some of these now that we see where they come through. One of the things I think that's interesting is the drop-off point. For example, in decent housing, we go from an item that has 13 points down to the next closest one that has 5 points. So it seems like there are 3 things that seem very important and others that don't seem nearly as significant in the way that works. To me, that indicates that we want to really focus on those top 3 items. I think there may be some things, I'm looking at suitable living environment, where the first item is provide funding for organizations that assist Provo residents to improve job skills. I think there are a lot of groups out there other than city government that do that. I wonder if it would be not a wise thing for our city government to try to do job training. But if we could identify some of those groups that do job training, you know, Utah Valley University and its associated Mountain, what is it, the college? Yeah.
And that's a good point. This is not necessarily how the city would run a program, but is what the city would like to see these funds being used for. So what I would, in following with these objectives, the main reason why we're preparing this is so that we can put it together with our application for funding. And so in that application for funding, as we put these objectives, then we can rank those applications based on the criteria presented here, that for organizations that come in with proposals like what you mentioned. So this is not necessarily, we're not saying the city is going to be involved in creating or managing or administering projects. is how the funding could be used.
So I'm thinking we ought to have a discussion about that because maybe we don't want that to be our top priority. And then the other question that I have, I noticed that some were concerned that we didn't get enough publicity out for the public to come and comment on these. Are you confident that we did a really good job of getting a lot of public input on where they feel like?
Well, we had 83 responses. That's
83.
83.
Was that in
We
one
had a lot
meeting?
more citizens here.
Was it 83 citizens that came?
No. To the open house, we probably had about 10 to 12 people. So the majority of the responses were through the online survey.
Through an online survey. And how were people invited to participate in that?
We did it through, to Facebook and the mayor's blog, and we sent it to the neighborhood chairs. Chairs also.
Yeah, so this is neighborhood chairs, it was put on, we developed a website, a webpage. 83 is not a very big number, but it's more citizen input than we've ever, than has ever had at this point in this discussion.
That's a good point. This is the first time that we've asked for public input at this stage of the preparation of the comp plan. So, yes.
I assume that will be impressive to those who move you forward your application, move forward for the very first time. The priorities have been informed by the public at large. The Sunday of
No, I can't find it, but it seems like I remember there was an item of small business loans. Do you know where that is? And how that ranked with the public? It seemed like the public ranked it higher than the council right there. Yeah, because I think we had just had some briefing on that, or we had actually just moved money out of that program because it hadn't been used. And I thought that was interesting that maybe the public having a little more information on some of those things, that we might match up a little bit better on some items. But there's something to consider, I guess, is that the public may not have been informed on some of the programs currently.
Our purpose with presenting these objectives is, at this point, not necessarily to say, or although you could do that, to say we want to concentrate most of the applications or most of the funding to these type of things, or still include all of these objectives in each one of those areas, and perhaps assign 3 or 4 major objectives that you would rather see the funds being used on. We could drop some or include them all. Again, this is so that we can help those that are soliciting funds through application know what to anticipate as to what the city would like to see those funds, how the city would like to see those funds used. After the applications are received, there are committees that look at those applications, that do a little study on the applicants, receive a presentation from the applicants. The council is welcome also to give some input as to what you would like to see from those committees, and give them direction as to what would you rather see the funds being used at the beginning or at the end, or even at the time after all the applications have been submitted. There's also a public hearing where you would make a final determination or the beginning of the determination as to how the funds would be used based on the applications that we received. So what I'm trying to say with that is at this point, you're not being tied down to something specific for any decision that you want to make right now. So.
I understand correctly that the bulleted items listed as they are represent the final weightings. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. One interesting feature of the 3 categories and the weighted options within each is that after the first 5, there's a fairly clear separation.
Correct.
And if, my question to you is 15 too many? Would it be better if it were 9? That is, if we took the top 3 from each category. I know you only weighted the top 4.
Well, yes, you're right.
Going with using the top 5 would give us a fair separation from the remainder. But is that too many?
For each category, you mean to
Yeah,
say?
5 for each category, a total of 15.
And these are areas for the next 5 years, right?
Yes. That's one of the reasons why we went as wide as we did, is because this is for the 5-year outlook. It's not just for next year. So what we're trying to do is be as comprehensive as we can from this point. And then every year we do an action plan, so that the applications and all of this, where if desired, we could focus a little more narrower in a few of these objectives.
I'm suggesting perhaps prioritize the top 5.
Okay.
Category. With possibility for review and revision, obviously, as you go along. But how will you determine the awarding of grants? Will you partition the monies equally into the 3 categories? Or, for example, improve and maintain neighborhood integrity? The first item, decent housing, is by far the largest, has by far the largest weighted score. Would that get a disproportionate amount of funding as a result? Or?
Not necessarily, because again, it will also depend on what type of applications we receive, or what. It may be that was the most important thing that we decided to do here today. But on this first year, we get no one, or maybe one agency that is looking to do some of that. And depending on what the scope of their project would be, how much funding could be assigned for that.
Jerry, I'm hoping that your office will be very proactive rather than just waiting to see who's going to come in. If in fact you find that most of the council and the public wants to see neighborhood rehabilitation, that you would go out with an RFP or something and say Provo City is very actively looking now for neighborhood revitalization projects, and will you please submit an application?
And this is the reason why we're doing this differently this time. Because in the past, we were reactive. Why we're coming into this process now is because we're looking to be more proactive.
So you will go out and request people to provide proposals on something like that if you see it's a high priority.
Exactly.
It's an excellent motion Mr. Davis makes. But this not only does this give you a way of identifying directions to take that are mutually informed by the council's priorities and those of the general public, it strikes me that it also provides you with a rating system that is the basis for a rating system when you evaluate the proposals that you receive.
Correct.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Pepper?
Dan, if the council were to decide that improve and maintain neighborhood integrity through repair, rehabilitation, housing should get a larger portion of funds because of its ranking, and after a period of time that money isn't being used to the extent we anticipate or anticipate, could that be reprogrammed in other categories?
It can be.
I would think there would make some sense for the council to prioritize the amount of dollars based on your priorities for rehabilitation.
Would an annual audit of the response to these categories be adequate?
Yes.
So that's something the council should schedule. Mr. Taylor, if you'd make a note of that, that we're close. Your revisit. Six.
So this item would not be moved to an action meeting because we're not requesting a resolution or anything. We're pretty much looking for direction as to how would you like to see these in an application? Would you like to see them as they are, as we presented here, or in any different way? Would you rather not even assign a specific priority? Like, that's kind of what we're looking for. Some direction.
Is there a deadline for reading?
Yeah, generally, we put out our applications the day after Labor Day. And so that was a couple of weeks ago. So the soonest that we can get this going, we will be able to have those applications
I'll
available.
send it to members of the council electronically with the invitation, the open invitation, to review and to suggest revised wording where we think appropriate.
If that's something
With
that,
the deadline, so that you can meet your Labor Day.
yeah, the Labor Day was 2 weeks ago.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
So we're past the deadline.
I'm thinking of
Here.
Everest. Columbus Day. How about a week? Yeah.
So make sure that I understand what you're requesting here is for us to send the documents that you have already in an electronic format.
Not these documents, we've already got these.
Well, but I don't know that we reviewed them adequately to say that's the way we think it should read.
Oh, I was wondering if you're gonna have them actually send the application to us, that they're filling out.
No, just these
Okay.
priorities, the wording of the priorities.
Okay.
It seems to me that's what your interest is. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we're looking to see, can we move ahead with this or not?
Is this included in our documents?
Is, I think, the things that you've shown.
The pie charts are.
The graphics are not.
But I don't know if you,
But the memo, you received the memo
right?
like that
Yeah.
with the other graphics. You do have that in electronic format. PDF, I guess.
We can send this to the council members.
We can also
Pie
include
charts.
these pie
Yeah.
charts.
And so,
So,
Oh, this one here.
we'll simply say, and please remind us in your memo, your email, no later than next Monday.
okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You-
Mr. Chair, are we going on to the next item?
Yes.
Would it be possible to hear from Mr. Almonte's here to,
With respect to the item?
Yeah,
Yes.
could we just get to that and then back to item number 6? So in case a couple number more. Oh, it is the next, so we're not doing 6? We're going to finish 6. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we was doing 5. Okay. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I thought we had one more item before we heard from him, and I didn't want to
Budget.
delay him anymore. Okay.
I thought you were praying, Matt.
I'm praying.
David Armand is a member of our budget committee, and he is going to.
Did you guys ever break at all or not? Do you want to stand? Do you want to stand?
You mean break or take a break?
Either or. No, I just didn't know if you want to stand. You've been sitting for a long time. I may have relaxed more than I wanted to during that last night. My apologies. So, no disrespect, just. But I don't know if you just are accustomed to sitting.
We're highly practiced.
Unfortunately, Dr. Kendall's not here, and she won't tell you that you need to stand to stay healthy, but I'm standing, so it's okay. The summary should relatively be brief. One of the questions that the committee has had is wanting to make sure that we're in line with the direction that we've received from the council, and we have two council members that are very good at trying to help us. And my understanding is what you wanted is kind of a briefing on where we're going with, particularly the outreach portion of the project that we're working on. And so, and I don't know what briefing that you want, but what I'll do is I'll give you just kind of a summary of the last couple of meetings. We did get the message in our last meeting that the outreach that we're trying to do to get ideas about solving a long-term deficit that we can see based on the current funding patterns, that we don't want to have a chilling effect on the school district's bonding initiative. And so we're trying to ramp up quickly and find a way to get feedback, because one of the concerns that Larry Waters has brought up is that it's really hard to affect the budget given the time frame that we have. And usually, you get the budget you have for a couple of months and then you have to pass it. So any type of systemic changes would take more time, both for research and then ultimately political will to go forward with that. But we agreed, based on our understanding of what you want us to do, to postpone that. And I think currently what's happening is that the council staff is working on video. I think the script is still in process. And then a series of web pages kind of explain both the situation, which was briefed in this meeting several months ago, and then in the general council meeting, which I did get an email from a citizen who said, I guess that link isn't working for that particular city council meeting, where we walked over kind of the issues that the committee has identified with the long-term funding. And so that might be something if someone can follow up to see if that link can be made available again.
In fact, you made that presentation.
Unfortunately, I did. Yeah, I apologize, but that was only because
No apology.
Well, no,
I was clarifying that it was you.
No, it was me. Yeah, and I'm just trying to clarify that I wasn't supposed to. It was actually Larry who was going to present, but couldn't make it. So as today, I noticed that both he and George aren't in the room, so they're both proving once again brighter than I am. So, but both of them had other commitments that they could make it at this time, and so, So what we've been working on then is looking at how to explain, metaphor to explain the challenges that the city faces, to then also invite citizens to participate in some feedback to see if there's any ideas that we haven't come up with as a committee that might help close that deficit gap that we see approaching in the 7 to 10 year time frame. And so I think that we're united in wanting to get that feedback, and I think we're united in at least our support of a metaphor approach with basically a trigger video to try and get more people. I mean, you just sat through, the presentation with the 83 response rate, which anyone who's tried to get public response, anything that isn't immediately contentious, will find that that's not bad. I mean, it's hard to get people engaged. And one approach would just to do a Chicken Little approach and say that we're out of money and we're going to start with it, but that's not the case yet. And we think it's counterproductive to go from a crisis management. The analogies that Larry brought up that I thought that were good is of a family that is barely making ends meet. You're paying your mortgage, you're paying your bills, but you're clearly not going to get any raises in the near term. And then you find out that your roof's leaking. And what do you have to cut? What do you have? And we saw that in the budget process with the capital improvements going forward, but that's really kind of where we are. And we saw that solution in this year's budget, and we're projecting to do that over the next 5 years with borrowing money. But at some point, that borrowing becomes very expensive to the citizens of Provo and becomes less an attractive option than possibly looking at other sources of funding or looking at what we should cut. But we didn't want to make those recommendations without first getting feedback from the general public, even if that feedback is limited to a handful of citizens that are very interested in this issue. But that's what our direction is. We want to make sure that is the direction that the entire council is comfortable with. And I'll let Cam or anyone else opine if I'm misleading. I think that's generally the feeling of the committee. So I don't know.
That was a very good summary of the direction that we are headed. If the council would like us to head that way. And also, there was some question of whether the council's intent was to subsidize programs or recoup user fees, and what the sort of general intent of the council is when it comes to some of the user fees. Do we want users to pay for those things, or are we more trying to provide services for citizens that we're willing to then subsidize? And so those are some, kind of tough questions that came up in our conversation, but it would be helpful if, I don't know if at a retreat where we could really flesh that out, but at some point it would be really helpful moving forward to know what the intent of the council is regarding user fees. The finance committee, Denise and John Morgan,
Here.
who are here, are working on a template for user fees, which we really appreciate their help. They've been just fantastic. So,
And that, for our public that might be watching, I mean, the big issue is I think Mr. Taylor is one who raised in the meetings, and I think you and Larry went back with this concept of what is the philosophy of this council in terms of subsidization. I mean, things like youth programs, the example that we had in our meeting is that a youth sports program you may be willing to subsidize at a higher rate than an adult sports program because there's benefits to the youth program that may pay dividends in other areas of the budget, so it makes sense to incentivize that. The general benefits to adult health care, decreased ambulance calls or fire calls or something like that, may not be something that the council philosophically feels that that's something that they want to subsidize. And I think that's why we're looking at these templates to give you an idea of kind of what is the rate of subsidy for the particular service that you're providing, so you can then get to that decision point where you're saying this is how we want to do it. I think that's where we came that from. The other low-hanging fruit that we talked about was also the issue of ramping up towards a RAP tax, looking at the discussion of some type of recreational arts sort of tax to relieve the general fund, which relies heavily on the enterprise funds transfers in to solve problems in shortfalls in that way. And that might be one way that at least the committee felt that it was a good idea to do it. We know that it's a hard road to toll for elected officials to say that they're in favor of tax. The committee is excited about the fact that it's tax that's paid by people that buy things, which includes nonprofit people in the community, so they can share equally with that burden. But I think that's the other one. I think that the other easy takeaway that people can start looking at. That, again, we don't want to compete with bonding initiatives, and we don't want to lead the press to conclude that the sky's falling and we have to raise a bunch of money really, really quickly. Instead, what we're trying to do is just look at the fact that we are barely living within our means. We are finding ways to get it done, but we live in a community that we really think we should flourish. And to do that, there'll have to be some hard thinking. But we think that you have resources on the committee. I am the least qualified on that committee. There are some brilliant people on that committee, but the council is at a stage that we think that the hard thinking and hard choices to be made now, that will really make a huge difference in another 10 or 15 years. So that's, go ahead, Larry.
We also had when we think about what we're subsidizing, there are so many different types of things. We reflect back on the challenge that we went through with business licenses. And the idea, are we really subsidizing those business licenses? And is that something that we as a council now, at one point we said no, and then we decided, you know what, maybe we do. And so we have to kind of decide what direction we want to take on that. It would be helpful for the committee. Another thing that we talked about was impact fees. And Wayne Parker gave us a great, we were hoping that all we have to do is raise our hand and say, yeah, we think we ought to get our impact fees where they should be, that there's a process in that. And we need to see whether the council really feels that this is the process that we want to go through, because we feel as a committee that we are low on our impact fees. And yet the process is a little painful. Well, it's more than a little painful. And we have to decide on those things. But that was something that we were really quite concerned about. And the other thing that we wanted to do was talk about the sustainability. First, we jumped in and talked about the water issues and our capital improvements for water. And then we realized that, well, the administration is probably taking the lead on that. Anything we can do to help the people to understand our challenge in the future, and then maybe give us some feedback. Rather than focus on individual things, let's talk about the big picture of sustainability and say, this is where the city can get money. Help us with, what are you thinking? And that was why we wanted to come out and have some open houses or video or whatever it is, to try to get some feedback on, well, what do the citizens really want? What services are they willing to cut? Or what are they willing to do to help us get more done?
And I think the committee's pretty unified in thinking that basically there's three things that probably will have to happen over the long term to make sure that the budget is balanced. And sadly, I mean, that there will be fee increases. There probably will be some type of tax increase, and ultimately there'll probably have to be some type of cut in service all the time. And trying to prioritize which of those, none of those are sexy sellable things. They're nothing that anyone's going to be elected saying, I'm going to raise your taxes, cut services, and raise your fees, right? And so what we're trying to do is see if we can look further enough down the line to put a foundation in place to take care of some of those things. As a classic example with the RAP tax, that it actually gives you more flexibility down the line, that's not as difficult once you can get over that hurdle. And I think that's where we go to those trade-offs, is that we don't want, as a focused committee, to miss any opportunities that the general public may have thought of or may have lived someplace else that had ideas that weren't on our table, especially before we get to that stage of, well, so we started with this idea of what would you trade? Like, what would you not want to subsidize this so you could have this service? But it's very clear that first we want to make sure there's nothing else we can do structurally with the way that we fund things before we start talking about what services become more expensive. So.
Typically, these meetings are not well attended, so we hoped to sort of tag on to the neighborhood meetings, maybe have combined neighborhood meetings, so that we could have just a segment of their neighborhood meeting, give them a short 3-minute video, explain where we're at, and then ask any concerned citizens or those that have ideas to please, let us know, email us, and then we would have another open house type meeting where they could all come, those that were interested, who wanted to come and share ideas.
Corresponding to 5 areas.
Yeah.
Well, 5 people at 5 meetings.
5 meetings. No, yeah, we would.
Worried about 5 meetings.
But you never know. So we're hoping to.
That would be lavishly attended.
As a former interim chair, yes.
I do have a question. I know that these are complex issues, but if in fact the ZAP tax were passed and the city, I'm assuming, would be able to use funding from that to cover things like the Cubby Center, maybe the golf course and parks, would that free up enough money by itself to resolve the issues that you've been talking about?
No, it's
It's
not.
$1 million that would free up, right, John?
About $1 million a year.
$1 million a year it would free up.
Yeah, no, and I think that it just illustrates the fact that this is a complex thing, and there's not a silver bullet. I wish, well, I guess there was. If I could invent something and donate billions of dollars a year to the city, then we'd be fine. But I failed to do that. I apologize here. So I'm working on it. I just had to find out how to do this. But I think it's going to have to be a combined approach, because there's really not one thing you can do that won't toss all the other things out of balance. And I think that the city's done a fantastic job of trying to balance the fees. George Stewart is a great component of the fact that our fee structure is still very generous to the citizens based on the value they get, based on what they pay into it. And so there might be some give there too, where you can generate money by increasing fees. But there's a sensitivity, as in that presentation, to the fact that most people outside of this room, and probably everyone inside this room as well, have seen wages stagnate to where your buying power, that was the first slide that shocked me, the buying power is a little bit less than it was, well, unless you're the average person, probably it's $10,000 less than it was 10 years ago. And so I think knowing that, it's trying to figure out the way that you can, it's basically doing the timing on a car, if anyone's old enough to have done that. But you can go past a state of trying to time the finances, and it actually causes more problems and leaving it missing a little bit to start with. And that's, we're trying not to do any harm with any proposals. And I think that's why these low-hanging fruit proposals, which the impact fees turned out not to be as low-hanging. We thought you could just ratchet it up and but I think all of these things are like that. Every place you try and find a funding source, there are consequences to that.
Is there a magic number? Only we had X number of dollars.
No, I don't think so. I think the difficult problem with that is what in our presentations, and I think the mayor explained this every year with the budget. One of the biggest challenges is the growth of healthcare, and that far has exceeded any inputs that we have. The other one is inflation, because there's not, we joke that ideally what we love is a legislator to pass a law that said that every year you adjust taxes based on inflation, because our tax base gets smaller every year with inflation because it doesn't automatically adjust. But every pencil they buy, everything that you pay for in the city is adjusted to inflation, which means your actual purchasing power in the city gets smaller and smaller. And so I think that we probably have one of the best cities in North America in terms of kind of creative decisions for finance. I mean, John has been fabulous and very open with us and explaining the challenges that he faced. And I think we've done, I don't know any city that's done a better job than Provo has. It's just that what we don't want to do is, you have someone that's great at fixing things. And so when you sell the house, you find out that the roof's going to collapse, right? And that's what we don't want to do, is have another council come in 12 or 15 years from now and then say, why in the world didn't they look at this? It's like, well, because it wasn't that exciting. I mean, you don't, how are you going to do a ribbon cutting for a tax, right? It's just not something that you want to put on a Facebook page. And so it's one of these things that I think that's the sensitivity that we have as a committee, is trying to come up with suggestions that are both feasible in the current political environment. We have some benefits to the fact that we've already passed a budget. We already kind of know what we're going to do in the next 5 years for capital improvements, and we've vetted that and know where we're going. But we still have a sense of urgency that we really have to do the hard work of seeing what can we do. What can we raise? What can we change?
As I recall, our intents were two. That is, with respect to the committee. The first was to draw from your expertise with respect to a sustainable, balanced budget in the long term. And for you to identify the impediments to sustainability, including the reduced purchasing power, deferred maintenance, and the issue of insufficient revenues was a possibility of additional revenues. And then once you have identified those impediments, suggest remedies. And they might be rank order. It could be several of them. In fact, for you, essentially rank order in terms of, were you to do this, then you would be able to move us this much closer to a sustainable budget. So that's the first and by far the largest intent. The other was quite different, and that is to, again, with the benefit of your expertise, provide for the citizens of Provo in a friendly way, easily accessed online, a dashboard by which any citizen could, by indicating some sort of very basic information about her or his circumstances, receive a comprehensive report of everything she or he is paying to the government.
Okay.
Whether it be taxes, fees, other forms of payment coming from my pocket to the government.
And by government, we're saying the municipality, right? Okay. Okay. No, and I think we haven't started that. John's explained a little bit of the detail involved and something like that, and I think that will be fleshed out with the template process that we're working on. Because I think that if I remember the conversation correctly, one of the tricky parts is how you distribute overhead per capita for that citizen to know what percentage of these ceiling tiles that am I paying for, and so. But I think we can work on that. I think once we get a handle on the other recommendations, I think going back and doing that should be something that will take a substantial amount of work. But it isn't the anxiety-ridden work that coming up with a solution is. And so, but I think that would be helpful to the citizens. I think what will come out of this process, and what I've learned a lot about, is how we balance budgets using fees, enterprise fees, to make ends meet, and how important those fees transfers are to the orderly work in the city, and us playing with those, how dangerous that is with the good work or the city. And I think that's something that we're still trying to get a handle on. I think the classic example is that we approved that fee increase for water, and that's to pay off the bonding that we need to do for water to keep water pressure. But a portion of that increase will actually go to many other things besides water. And we toyed with the idea of seeing, well, can we restrict that just to pay off the bond? But we found that the complexity of that really would almost, it could be counterproductive. And so that's why we're continuing to research to see if there's a way we can do it. And I think that's, it's one of the endemic challenges to this. My favorite characterization was George Stewart, who said that the way that we finance the city with enterprise funds was his greatest greatest joy as a mayor and his greatest vexation as a member of the city council. And I think that it underscores that kind of play between the two. But I think
Tension.
But I think that tension is really healthy. I mean, I think that that's the nice thing about having a community look at this. And is as comfortable as I am, often I feel that I'm over my head on a lot of these issues. But I think it's nice to have, a national expert on public financing on the committee and a former mayor and former city council, because I think that you get perspectives that you couldn't get probably anyplace else in the country. So.
I had a question then. Those are the two things that the council was looking for. There was a statement one time from the council to consider outreach. We talked about having truth and taxation hearings annually, just to help educate the public. And I was of the opinion that this committee was also involved in some form of outreach. Would you like us to back off on those things as a committee, or?
Oh, no, I think what we're planning now to take place in November
Is what you wanted also with that, with the council?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what I just wanted to make sure we were on track with what you're going for there.
Other comments? Thank you.
I wonder if Mr. Morgan would like have anything you should.
No, I think they've done a national job of sharing what's been discussed on the committee and some of the key issues, so I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you.
And this group is just great to work with. I need to say it's a joy to actually, I enjoy the meetings, the discussion, the give and take, it's very, very good.
Enjoy the meetings.
What a deal. What's wrong with me? I know. You got a pill for that?
Maybe time for psychological.
I think it might need a little help.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold.
No problem.
Thank you. Mr. Simons is with us to provide training relative to the Metropolitan Water District program. Thank you, sir.
Let's see, we need, up to the top. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you for a few minutes today.
Art, do you mind flipping that line?
Both of them or just one?
That one's fine. Thank you.
Someone do? Let's see. You hit slide. Got it. And to advance, one advances here. There we go. Just to take a few minutes to be able to visit with you about the Metropolitan Water District. It kind of was a difficult situation to get into speaking about the district, what it is, why it's there, and there's items associated with it if we don't end up immediately going to water and water rights, which is what it's all about. And Dave Decker and I talked a little bit leading up to this presentation about kind of the way to give the biggest bang for the buck on information would be to try to, and he made an analogy that I thought, I've been trying to figure out where the best spot was to work it in, and I decided 5 minutes ago it's right at the start, so it'll start to make sense what we're looking at. We did a demonstration in here a while back, if you remember, and some of you helped with filling up the tanks. This time we're going to talk a little bit about, if you want to kind of see what the relationship between Provo City Water Resources and Metropolitan Water District, think of it as two large buckets, large buckets of water. One of them belonging to Provo City, decreed water rights belonging to Provo, and the other bucket belonging to Metropolitan Water District. And both of them are very critical to Provo's, and that's why their relationship is so critical.
The purpose of a water district, and this is right out of the original Utah Metropolitan Water District Act. They're organized for the purpose of acquiring, appropriating, developing, storing, selling, leasing, and distributing water for and devoting water to municipal and domestic purposes, irrigation, power, milling, manufacturing, mining, metallurgical, and any and all other beneficial uses. For that reason, that's why the districts are so important, and that's why the Metropolitan Water District of Provo was created. It was organized in 1935, incorporated at that point, and what brought it about was the Provo River Water Project. The Provo River Water Project, and one particular aspect of it was the Deer Creek Reservoir. And out of that, in excess of 100,000 acre feet, there was an 8,000 acre foot block that was up for sale or draft or however you want to put it. And so that's why the district was formed, and they ended up getting a subscription contract, and you hear us refer to that a lot, or the subscription water. That's between Metropolitan Water District of Provo City and the Provo River Water Users Association for 8,000 acre feet of storage water per annum. Now, where that originally came in, went to, and I don't want to get deep into this, but was with Exchange 85 when I first started on, and what it came about to was this, and we'll go through another couple of slides to talk about it a little bit. But the Provo River Decree, or the Morris Decree of 1921, is where our decreed rights came from our springs and our river water. And then there are springs from Provo Canyon that we bring in actually in South Fork. The Provo Canyon springs are ours. The springs in the South Fork of Provo Canyon actually are tributary to the river. We don't own them. We own one small one up there, but the rest of what we take out of there, which is about 3,500 to 5,000 gallons a minute, depending on the year, coming out of there all year long in beautiful, pristine spring water, is water that we have to supply back to the river somewhere. So when I first came on, eons of time ago, we used to trade gallon for gallon for every drop of the water that we took in those South Fork springs. We replaced with water out of this 8,000 acre foot of storage the Provo Metropolitan Water District had. And again, that was supplied for Provo, and we'll talk about a little bit more as we go on through. But one other change application was the A19-153 that as Provo went on and started to develop the properties and it no longer needed the lot irrigation water here for it, we got a change application during the summer months to be able to trade that towards that water. So it ended up in essence making available in the neighborhood of 3,000 acre feet at this point in time that didn't used to be available. Provo City Code from 2013, 2.28.010, is where it lists the creation and the number of members of the district. There is hereby created a Metropolitan Water District comprising the whole of Provo City to be governed by a board of directors having all the powers and duties provided by law. The board of directors of the Metropolitan Water District shall consist of 5 members, one of whom shall be the director of the city's Department of Water Resources, and 4 of whom shall be appointed by the municipal council. Provided, however, that all board members having unexpired terms when the number of directors is reduced from 7 to 5 shall serve the balance of their terms. And you can see the amended dates. What it referred to is most of the boards in the city, have 7 members to them. In this case, it was reduced to 5. Provo City Code also on the appointments to the Board of Directors of the Provo City Metropolitan Water District. Point number 1, the municipal council shall, without the approval of the mayor, appoint new members of the Board of Directors of Provo City Metropolitan Water District, except as otherwise required by law. Point 2, the mayor shall appoint the Provo City Director of Water Resources to serve ex officio as a director of the Provo City Metropolitan Water District. Why we've gone through these items is kind of just a basis for the education, was to go back to this 2-bucket situation of our water sources. Our Canyon Springs, years ago when I started, for a good share all through the winter, would handle the water alone, and we turned out percentages of the South Fork water because we didn't need it. That ended about 18 years ago because the demand on the system as Provo grew got to the point that we never turned that water up. We needed every drop of it. As we continued to grow, to where we needed more and more and more, we drilled more deep wells. Currently, we have 15 operational deep wells. Some of you have toured those. We've talked a lot about them. And that's how we supply the city. So it's our spring water, our deep wells, And then also we take water from the river or storage from this 8,000 acre feet and run through the Central Utah Water Conservancy District treatment plant, depending on the demand on the system. We take water from the dam. The bucket number 2 is the Provo Metropolitan Water District storage right of the 8,000 acre feet, as we've talked, as well as the Thorn Well. Provo Metropolitan Water District is a little different from the city on a couple of points that we're going to get into now. The reason that you create a district is back to this point of that they can appropriate water in the city. However, they can purchase water, and then different from the city cannot sell their water rights, nor would we want to. We absolutely would not want to sell our water rights. A district can buy and sell water rights at the whim of the board. And so the concern that we have, frankly, is that the water that was originally obtained for Provo, and that was the intent, is that time goes on, that we make sure that Provo is where the water goes. And there can be an issue of the district. Why you may think, well, why would it be any different? Going a little farther, the district is not bound by constitutional restrictions on indebtedness like a municipality, so they can go into debt to purchase water or facilities. We talked about Provo owning significant rights from the Morse Decree in the river, and a municipality is prohibited by constitutional restrictions of selling its water rights, and we wouldn't wish to. However, a district can buy and sell water and the rights at the discretion of the board, even outside of its jurisdiction. A municipality may sell a surplus water, not the right, in or outside city limits, and this has gone through the courts before and been back in other areas. So what I'm leading to, when I talked about the 3,000 acre feet that is now available during the summertime because of the trait we have on the river, we have a short window, if you will, where that water can be marketed. Dave's worked on it previously, and this last year we went through and we successfully leased a block of water, not the right, but a block of water to Central Utah Water Conservancy District. They would like to have a lot more, and they'd like to have it, quite candidly, permanently. And we are aggressively stating, no, we're not going to go down that road. We may, for 4 or 5 years or whatever works out, lease that block of water a little bit more to them because we actually have more than we physically need right now. That is going to change as time goes on. And when we hit build out that we estimate, we're at about 120,000 now in population. Build out from our master plan shows us somewhere between 195,000 and 197,000. We're going to have the need for every drop of the water. And what I'm leading to is that Provo City has a preferential right to purchase the 8,000 acre feet before it's offered anywhere else. We currently pay $35 an acre foot. That's very, very low. When the district was first formed and Provo was purchasing or leasing that water from Metro, it was for $2.50 an acre foot. And at that time, that was a ridiculously low price. But what I'm trying to draw here is that water and the district were formed to the benefit of Provo City. And it's not a matter of other jurisdictions. That's not really what it was formed for. And that's where we want to make sure that we stay online and with getting along with Metro and make sure they stay online with council appointments with people who want to look along the line of keeping the water for Provo City and not looking at marketing it elsewhere. That sounds easy enough, but what it's come around to is that because the budgets being what they are, when the 3,000 acre feet became available for this short window, it put Metropolitan into a position. They still have an assessment they have to pay every year to the Provo River Water Users Association for that storage there. Now, 2 years ago, you remember that horrible short winter there where the allotment went down to only 43.5% of the 8,000 acre feet. Now, we had stored for years some extra allotments and we held on to them and had them available, so we haven't even been hurting anywhere. But other systems have been hurting drastically, and they're going to start looking for more and more water. But where the drought affects them that way and cuts them back that far, they still have to pay the assessment. So if the money's not coming in, then the Provo Metropolitan Water District has a hard time paying their assessments, and they're going to be out looking for someplace else to market the water. we've made an agreement with them to keep them whole by buying out the full 8,000 acre feet at the $35 an acre foot because we budget for that. We'll keep them whole each year with that so they don't have that problem. It then turns that water over to Provo then with the literal ownership of that block of water for the year. And that's what we marketed last year on the 1,000 acre feet, the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, and then they marketed it elsewhere. So,
Art, is that price under contract, and if so, for how long?
The $35 an acre foot, it is. And that's a very good question, excellent question. That's under a contract only by the year from us and can be changed immediately by a vote of the board. And so going into this next year, they could take it on up from there, which that actually was put forth by the board. That they wanted to go, well, what that would take it on that is we would go from a $240,000 or $280,000 payment, depending on what was available, 35 an acre foot in a full year. If you went up to $40 an acre foot, you go to $320,000, and then on up from there. If they go to $50 an acre foot, you're looking at $400,000. And so what we've basically done is said we will remove the necessity to try to market it elsewhere. We agreed we'd pay the 35 an acre foot, buy the whole block, even if the whole block wasn't there, but then they didn't have to start raising the price. Because the year, say they raised the price this year, and they went to $50 an acre foot, and we only bought half of it. Well, we're still within the area then of the amount of money we budgeted, and they would get enough to pretty close to pay their assessment. But if that rolls to another full year then, and the price is at $50 an acre foot, we just went to $400,000 to try to be able to lease that. And bearing in mind again, the water was originally procured for Provo City's use, not to be sold elsewhere. Not that it can't be, but and the preferential right issue we talked about before was a matter of giving Metropolitan a choice, so they're not tied down and by contract and they can't do anything with it. But in this particular case, what has me worried, just seeing the system over the years, and as Dave and I have talked extensively on this, when we go from where we are now to where, and I won't be here at that time, Dave might be, but in 2060, I'm not going to be around, but whoever is going to want every drop of that water. It's going to be very, very critical to be used in a number of places, either try to trade it for the spring water we don't own, or more specifically, would go through Central Utah Water Conservancy District treatment plan and come into the system as finished water that way. And so it's a very critical water. It's important we hold on to it so that if both entities, Provo City and the Metropolitan Water District of Provo City, they need to work together and they need to be together and they need to, the ships need to sail in the same direction, if I can put it that way. And we need to try to keep it going that way. And just to put it very, very bluntly, as a council, we would hope that you would appoint members that will keep it going that way. It's in the city's best interest that the members that are appointed are looking towards keeping the water from Provo City and it stays here, not going somewhere else for any reason. If we keep them whole, there shouldn't be any reason not to. Now, the other part of it is that the other thing the district can do, if you remember back to the definition, not only procuring water, but they can also build appurtenances and various water structures and things like that for the city they're created for. And looking at that, projects have been funded by Provo Metropolitan Water over the past years. Our one purchase was of a Thorn well. Now, when I was young, the Thorn rock products existed on the southeast end of town where I grew up. And for years, it was always there. All of a sudden, it wasn't. When they sold out, they had a few water rights. They had a well there that they used for cooling, which is the Thorn well. They had a spring up there, and then some other rights and a couple of other springs. Anyway, Metropolitan Water District purchased those. And they have gone ahead and transferred that Thorn well directly over to us, and we utilize it every year as part of our drinking water system. They actually ended up getting the water right originally and then paying to drill the 3700 North well between 1980 and 1981, and then we reimbursed them for the cost of the well when they transferred it over to us. And so when it was all said and done, they had drilled the well, equipped it, and we were ready to put it online, conveyed it to us, and then we paid them back just the cost of the construction. That one's 3,800 gallons a minute. They also did at the same time the 4800 North well of 2200 gallons a minute between 1980 and 1982, same arrangement. And then after that period of time, they again, as a district can, they purchased water in the Tip Canal water acquisition, and Central Utah Water Conservancy District wanted to take that over. It's a canal right, a fresh right irrigation system now they put in. So they purchased that from the Metropolitan Water District. Provo City, we couldn't have sold it. However, because again, a city that's prohibited by state constitutional law, they can't sell their water rights. They can trade them for an equal value, but they cannot sell them. And again, we wouldn't want to. The district can. So the district sold that to Central Utah Water Conservancy District, and they drilled with that money our Timpanogos well, or a Timpview well. We ended up with 900 gallons per minute out of that one. We have a water right called the upper right that Provo City purchased, and we're trading that through exchange to be able to drill these other wells. And we still have 5 of them we're going to be working on now. One of them being the Lions Park well is being drilled. But Timpview was picked up as well as Thorn. Timpview was drilled, put online, and then Thorn was picked up, converted, rebuilt, and put online for us by Provo Metropolitan Water District. So they have helped tremendously over the years. It's been a very good working relationship to be able to benefit Provo City, and we need to keep it that way. The problem that comes at this point is that there is a great push out there for the people that are hurting for water. And I'm not here to name any names of cities, but there are cities who are developing faster than they have water to supply them. And they're looking for water, wanting water, they're after it. And they're going to pay more than what we pay for it to Metro. And so it's a matter of, again, the encouragement we're trying to leave is that you want to appoint members to the board as a council as the time comes up, that you're going to appoint members that are going to be looking out for Provo City, not looking at marketing the water somewhere else.
Or do the members of the board know that going in? Or they think they're appointed as to take care of Metropolitan Water?
I can't say all of them always do. And so that's why now currently there have been some disagreements here and there, but we've worked them out, but I'm not sure that they necessarily do. And that's part of kind of the message we're conveying a little bit too, is they're appointed, they need a little bit of education to understand what the whole reason that Provo City Council appoints them is because what they're doing is for the good of Provo. And so that, again, this is a concern that we have, and it's very easy for a district to get into a rub if they lose track of why they're there. And I'm not saying that that's happening, I'm just saying that it could happen very easily. And we got a couple of disagreements we got worked out. Right now, we're even looking at possibly on a project we're doing with the development of Big Springs, we were having to phase it, and they're looking at actually they have enough of a balance that we're looking at possibly transferring $1 million over to us at this point to keep that project going with a faster phase, which we're hoping that happens. And again, that's what their money would be there for. And it has been proven in the past with these projects to be doing this. And so it's, I go back to being here as long as I have been, you hear the horror stories of years ago with everybody fighting and arguing over water. One name comes to mind, I won't mention it, but it comes that if somebody like that got on the board and started going a different direction, it could hurt Provo. It could hurt Provo. And so it's a matter of you just have to kind of be careful with who is appointed and make sure that they understand what they're really there for. And again, it's a good relationship and all, but it needs to be cultivated. There probably also needs to be, I assume, Matt and I talked a bit, I know Dave and Matt have, about appointing, or rather not appointing, but having one of the members of council kind of taking the responsibility to attend the quarterly meetings with Metropolitan as a liaison, if you will. Also can help with education that way to make sure what they see is going the direction for Provo City and that sort of thing.
Yeah, does the Metropolitan Water District have a staff independent of yours?
Yes, it does. It does.
have a facility, their own facility, an office facility, or?
No, their office facility actually is in our building right now. Now, years ago, again, back when Wayne Hillier, some of you maybe heard with him when he was the manager of the Provo Metro, he had an office down on 2nd West and about 2nd North in a little small area. And it saves them the cost of renting an office. It's also gone to more of a part-time position now for the kind of flows, especially with the fact that we are taking so much of the product of the water, and it's coming over to us anyway, as it should, and it's more of just kind of an office situation that way. Their treasurer right now, secretary, is Sarah Hubbs, who works for Provo City. She works for John Bordet in the finance section, and she does a great job. She's an accountant, and all there is along that line is keeping the books straight. She has no vote or no position in what happens there. It's just a staff position.
But nonetheless, it calls for some sophistication because this is a very dynamic.
It does, and you're 100% on. And one of the concerns, and as Dave and I talked, if we're going to get into a water supply and right still, we probably need 3 or 4 hours to even hit the surface of kind of telling you where everything comes from and where it goes. The River Decree on our Decree Springs gets a little bouncy and is a dynamic in and of its own at times, and especially with this 8,000 acre feet that's moved around quite a bit. The old Hamlin right comes into play with that because there's been some trades associated with the springs up the canyon, and we bounced around a lot as Dave and I talked. The water rights is like the dream that goes on and on and on and on and on. But the basis of this one is that 8,000 acre feet is so critical to us. It does belong to Metro, it does not belong to Provo City. But the best case we can do is have members on the board that will keep it going our way. Again, this $1 million, if they transfer that to us now, is going to be pivotal in finishing that project. So we're looking real good that way, but it's just we've seen a little bit of a rub can happen really, really easy if people lose track of where they are and why they're doing something.
Question for Mr. Jones. Given the situation that Art sketched for us, is there anything that would rule out our imposing a loyalty vote members who the council appointed to the Metropolitan Water District Board?
Loyalty to what?
Loyalty to the purposes he's outlined. That is the reason for maintaining, the reason for establishing this in the first place is the flexibility that it provides.
Exactly.
It doesn't come with cities.
You just summed it up. It comes because they can sell water, we can't.
Yeah, and they can make money. $1 million, for example, over time.
Yeah.
And we want to somehow capture the relatedness of the Metropolitan Water Board to Provo City and Municipal Council.
That's probably something we have to look at a little bit more. I think there may be some problems with that. Now, on the other hand, it may be something we can address a little bit better through education, in the sense that while I think there could be some concerns about with that kind of concept as far as their ability to freely fulfill the role that they have once they're appointed. On the other hand, once they are appointed, they have a fiduciary duty to the city and to exercise that role in the way that those benefits received. So it may be something that can be addressed somewhat through some education on what the fiduciary duty is. So the more it's about being careful to exercise that the way that they ought to.
Yeah, I've talked to Bart at length previous to this, and my goal, since the council is the appointing authority, twofold. One, for any board that has a city relationship, you have an oversight role. So we need to establish a more formal mechanism for you to exercise that oversight. Two, I think you have even more direct oversight through the appointing authority. And so without this type of education and process for your involvement, you're not really in a good position to understand who the board members are, who maybe future successors of those seats may be. And so that was the purpose of this discussion, was at least to begin and open the door to a better relationship and understanding of your role in partnership with this board.
The other thing we might look at is ordinance or bylaw amendments that clarify the case. There's duties imposed by the range to make removal options.
What's interesting, I'm just curious, what are the removal options that currently?
And I don't know the answer to that. That's the thing. We'll probably have to look at the bylaws and see.
I'm not serious. Maybe it's good.
I'm just curious, how long do they serve for? Was there 6 years, and who's on the board now?
Currently,
No, Kay is currently was asked to be a liaison.
the member, you're asking the members of the board?
Yes.
The staff member, Merrill Bingham is the manager, and I used to be the water director here. And then the board members are Greg Hudnall, who's a former council member, Dennis Weir, Dan Johnson, and Professor Wood Miller, and then myself now, the one that you just did a resolution here a short time ago, which technically that wouldn't have been necessary, but because it's appointed by Mayor Curtis, as opposed to, but there was a little bit of a misunderstanding there. Merrill was waiting for a resolution from council before I actually could even vote on this items going on in the meeting.
Did we get that to you? I already thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anyone who would object to Matt's pursuing this in the way that he's talking about? Is that sufficient, Matt?
No, he's not.
There's no one objecting to your moving ahead and putting something together our way of proposing.
I'll work with Bart.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Al?
Mr. Rowan, I suggest just a brief recess so I can load up a presentation.
Yes, let's break for 5 minutes. Reconvene at 10 till. Thank you.
Let me answer your question. So I noticed this in almost all city. It's just city houses. And so what it means.
So she would, right, that's what they kind of figured, but also she's right.
I'm also curious.
I'm going to take this over.
Yeah, I don't know. But gives us even more information to say we gotta have people.
I'm sure you can, yeah. Oh, I know.
Water being the ultimate issue. All of us. It's not bad water here.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. And she's going to go to be here.
It's good.
You do it tonight after the council.
Oh, and all of them. Process.
The mental corporation.
I know that they're. You got enough headaches. You don't need to.
Was on that committee.
Sunset and Brian. He's going off good. I don't know, did you say he? Oh, okay. I can watch and see if I see it.
How close are we getting to?
If he isn't here,
the age?
a few minutes.
There's an echo.
Okay, I'll kind of watch it.
I just said there's an echo. Steve, I said.
And we'll probably bring the food in there for you. Because I think our meeting's tight. We'll see.
Matt, whenever you're ready. He was on the board.
Happy. Pretty good area too.
Let's resume with Mr. Taylor's presentation.
Council members, thank you. This is, hopefully will be brief. This shouldn't take too long, but I think a little background is necessary to understand the issue behind this code cleanup initiative. And it did arise out of the last discussion that came out of the 3-acre rule discussion. As reviewed that ordinance, this is one that came to mind, and we decided to move forward, present it for your consideration. The purpose of the discussion at this point is not for the council to act on in any way. The council, and in fact, this is an opportunity for us to practice the policy governance model just a little bit. And we used the term earlier in the year whether policies were congruent with each other or incongruent. And there's two levels of congruency that we're going to be looking at. One is just within the city code itself, and two is within city policy, mainly focused on Vision 2030. The key issue is a one-word issue. It's may versus shall, which is a permissive versus mandatory requirement. And sorry, I didn't highlight the right words here, but developments which are located. This is the provision that causes concern. It's out of Title 1504, no 3200, which is the street standards provisions. Developments which are located at the end of stubbed local public streets. So to define stub, I do have a definition, but summary is a dead-end street that's going into an undeveloped piece of property, and for the purpose of eventually being connected into that developed property. So stubbed local public streets may be, and that's it. Here's the issue. Maybe figure that out. May be required to extend the street through the development based on the proposed circulation needs of the area. Now, this provision right here is slightly subjective. There's no real defining standards for what does that mean, proposed circulation needs of the area. Versus the later provision in the same section, a public street connection shall be provided to any existing or approved public street right-of-way stub abutting the development unless, and so we have a way out of requirement at the beginning of the provision, may be required, versus a later provision that says it shall be required, unless. And the unless does provide, in my opinion, more objective standard, not perfect, but more objective, such as, I didn't put it in the slideshow, I'll just read from my notes. Physical conditions that preclude development of the public street. Such conditions may include, but are not limited to, topography, natural resource areas, primary, secondary conservation areas such as wetlands, ponds, streams, channels, rivers, or lakes. Buildings or other existing development on adjacent lands, including previously subdivided but vacant lots or parcels that physically preclude a connection now or in the future. So that's much more objective than proposed circulation needs. Here's an example up in River Bottoms of where the may provision was used several times because of local concerns about through traffic, and despite the shall provision, it was determined that the circulation needs were not, it was not needed. Oops. And so we have a cul-de-sac here. We have a street connection which was not developed through here. We have another cul-de-sac and street connection was not developed here. We've talked previously about the importance of connectivity in the street system for traffic circulation purposes, also providing reliever routes, also in regards to emergency services. But one of the things that we will focus on is, what is the congruency between, so I suppose the first question is there incongruency with the existing ordinance, where we have a reliever and a shall later, and I think you could argue that either way. That it is congruent or incongruent, so what do we do? And let me give you another example before we move on with that thought. Here's an instance of 3 different subdivisions where the connections were made. And had they not been, you would have had to go all the way around. For walkability and traffic purposes, that would have been detrimental. This is on the west side. All right, sorry. So I think it's reasonably debatable whether that the existing ordinance could be viewed as congruent. Again, you could add that proposed circulation needs to the list of objective criteria. But it's still confusing enough to look that says, I think this is the primary question, why require a substreet from one developer only to not require the future owner to stub into it? So you've built infrastructure, you've used up land, it's now off the taxing rolls, and then we're not going to take advantage of that connection in the future. I think that's the practical question. Why require something when we have a way out of not requiring the connection in the future? So neighborhoods and vision. So how does the council have guidance and what you want to do with this? I think that's where additional city policy comes into play. The congruency with city policy. Neighborhoods goal: improve neighborhood interconnectivity. Encourage a pedestrian-friendly environment throughout Provo. Create and maintain a bike trail and sidewalk systems that connect all parts of the building. Natural resources. Encourage resource preservation through greater participation. Oh, sorry, this was a little bit of a stretch, but since we talk about sustainability all the time, I thought I'd throw it in. Energy conservation efforts. Okay, it does a disconnected street network increases energy use. Improve air quality. A disconnected street system does have an impact on air quality. Healthcare, disconnected, same principle. Promote wellness, preventive health care among residents. Walking is one of the most basic forms of preventative health care. January 23 increased 5% of the number of Provo City's adults 19 and older who indicate they exercise at least three times a week. So again, a connected street grid would help facilitate those goals. Congruency, promote the use of zero or reduced emissions through transportation using bicycles, mass transit. It's harder for bicycles than those other forms of transit, walking. Encourage location of basic shopping and services within walking distance. If you disconnected your neighborhood, you make everybody walk further, that decreases walkability to those types of services. Transportation mobility, promote the use of transit and alternative modes of transportation in the city. Sorry, I was doing this very quickly. Apologize for that. And walking is definitely an alternative mode. So the policy questions, I've already hit one of them. Why require stubs from one developer, but not require another developer to actually connect into them? We've already addressed, is the current practice policy incongruent with other articulated visions, policies? Are some of the objectives too, or some of the requirements too subjective? Address that. And I think that brings me to the conclusion. The May provision is probably not congruent with city policy. More objective standards do exist on our books today for allowing those exceptions. Apologize. Recommend moving, and so my recommendation is that you don't need to make a decision or even come up with the answer today. It's just whether you make a determination whether you would like to move this forward to the Planning Commission or a recommendation back to you on how to potentially resolve this potential incongruency.
Questions?
Yes, as I look at these things down the road, it seems to me that the roads, the stubs, are critical for our general plan. And if they're not in there, I just worry about if we're putting some stubs in, it's a lot easier to tell people in the future, this is where the road is going to go. But if we don't stub it in, you try to put a road through somebody's neighborhood that's lived on a quiet cul-de-sac forever, and you have a heart attack, and I understand why. And so I understand the reason for stubs, but it seems to me that these guys back here are the ones that should tell us where the stubs should go as far as connectivity goes.
It's actually the Planning Commission that gets to make the determination whether you actually stub in or not these guys.
Well, I think that they're the ones that know about it. The planning commission,
Well, they're presumably making recommendations.
we're from those guys. Okay, and I understand that, but they're the ones that understand connectivity a lot better than we do, or probably.
The text amendment that we approved most recently to council required the developer to present the street concept map, street layout plan, all the exact grades.
And I like that.
And I think, I don't think anything that we have on the books is contrary to what you said. The May provision has just left some developers a way out, if persuasive enough, to disregard the stub connections. And we have stub connections that lead to nowhere, and will never lead to any place because of the way it's developed.
And why did we put them in the first place is what I want to know.
Well,
And we didn't think we were going to go through
because this one developed, these two developed first, and then years later this one came in and said, I don't want to do that. And the planning commission said, heard the rationale why, and I said, okay, fine, you don't have to connect into it.
I lived right where that bottom circle is. That was my home for 15 years, and I kept waiting for that road to go through. Never wanted. I knew I was good. I'm still waiting, and I was going to move as soon as that road went.
But because of either persuasive, well, either because of persuasiveness.
Well, you bring up a good point too, though. Living in a cul-de-sac is highly desirable. The lots are more expensive. It's a different kind of a feel, and so, you know, where you require streets to go through for connectivity and for bikeability and walkability, and where you allow cul-de-sacs, that all has to come into.
Yeah, in the cul-de-sac standards, actually would have allowed this to be finished off as a cul-de-sac, as another exception and objective criteria for granting cul-de-sacs. In the case of this one, that didn't happen.
I have a question about the politics of the recommendation that you made. Would you be averse to producing a recommended fix?
Yeah.
Could go to the planning commission.
That would, if the majority would like me to, for specific language, I'd be happy to prepare that. But Brian Jones.
I mean, it seems to me that you've done some great service here by providing a precedent. And cleaning up the code is a thankless, possibly endless job.
I guarantee you both.
And the fact that you have hired an intern working closely with the municipal council staff to pursue that as his primary occupation means that we can expect this to happen more and more, where you come and say,
Our goal would be a minimum of at least once per meeting.
yeah, here's another fix that we need.
And we don't want to spend a lot of time on it.
No. It strikes me that invariably we're going to refer it to the planning commission, most often perhaps, but also to
possibly other
entities, administrative entities in the city. And it seems to me that it becomes more palatable if we're suggesting at the same time, here's a way to clean it up.
And I'd be happy to do that. We could come back in 2 weeks. I could show you specific language that you'd like to move forward, or you could just give me guidance and I'll prepare a proposed text. Now, with that comment, again, I think at this point, my recommendation is not necessarily to change it one way or the other, but to engage in a dialogue with the Planning Commission, not myself per se, but have the dialogue and ensure what should be the right solution and have them provide the recommendation to you. My purpose is highlighting what could be seen as incongruence.
To me, it just seems like an error that needs to be corrected. And I propose that we go ahead and allow that, make the correction to our recommendation, send it to the planning commission, and then we'll evaluate it again and get it back to the planning commission.
And I think one way that we can do that is I can draft some language, send it back out to you for some feedback before submitting it.
They can also go to community development at the same time, just to say.
Yes, and that would actually be the order that we would go in? And is that an application would be made through community development? The planners would actually get their arms around it before it went to planning commission. That's sort of a condensed process.
We need a motion.
I prefer a motion just to move that forward.
So that would be my motion. Thank you.
Mr. Hills, is no worries.
I'm writing it down.
You need some help.
So the motion was to allow Matt or to ask Matt to develop a proposed fix for the problem and come back to the council with that fix.
That's right. Circulated to community development as well as the council.
So just clarification, move that forward to community development for their review, but simultaneously let the council know what's missing.
That's right. With the assumption that the planning or whoever in the community development would then forward it to the planning commission. Some other entity as we look ahead. I think this serves as a very nice precedent for that cleanup process.
The next one is called, just a preview, the next one would be a discrepancy between the fire code cul-de-sac standards and the Title 15 cul-de-sac standards. So.
Don't anyone lose any sleep.
Just a question. I'm just trying to understand if it's best for the council staff to sort of initiate the suggestion and pass it down, or should we just take this to community development and say, here's a problem we see, what do you think we should do?
I think it's helpful for our staff to provide them a context that they can start debating the merits of the proposal. Likely it'll go through 2 or 3 iterations before you see it again formally.
Given that it's municipal code, municipal council strikes me, and his having done the research, he's going to put some in position to make recommendations. I'm not trying to force anything.
Yeah, and I think I characterize this as a place for them to start the dialogue and how to formulate a proper response. Not the perfect solution.
Well done, thank you.
All right, I don't think there was a vote.
Mr. Charles, thank you, Mr. Garrett, for your second. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Mr. Van Buren, thank you, Matt. Well done. Now to Brian Maxfield for discussion on a request for approval of a street vacation for a portion of 440 West, 380 West, and 880 North, adjacent to property owned by Intermountain Healthcare Health Services, Inc., to construct an additional hospital parking lot for property generally located between 800 North to 880 North and between 300 West to 440 West in the R16A zone of the North Park neighborhood.
Thank you. I believe most of you are aware that IHC is refurbishing the hospital. They had some seismic issues dealing with the tower, and they're looking to rebuild that in different formation and also to do some other changes to the site itself. As part of that, they've been buying up all the homes to the south of the hospital, and those are being torn down. You can probably notice that. A lot of that area is for parking lot expansion, which will serve the hospital in the future, and certainly during the construction, the reconstruction of the hospital, as that is undertaken. As part of that, there are 2 items that you need to deal with. There are the legislative issues and the administrative issues. In this case, the area is already zoned public facility, so there is not a rezoning required for this project. However, the legislative end comes in the vacation of the streets. As the homes are torn down, as the area is consolidated, the streets need to be vacated to, and that would allow the adjoining property owners, which is IHC, to assimilate that area into their site. And so the proposal is basically to approve those vacations as they're going forward. A couple of other items are some exterior rezonings, other things that are occurring and going to the Planning Commission next Wednesday. And IHC is, I think, releasing their final design drawing next Wednesday, in time for the Planning Commission to look at that for the meeting. Right now, we feel the staff's fairly comfortable with this layout and everything, we're totally comfortable with the layout and the consolidation of slots and the vacation of the street at this time. Any questions?
I do have a question. So I'm assuming the city is selling vacant seats, I see.
No, it just goes to the adjoining property owner, so there's no sale. However, there is a trade-off that IC's agreed to do in widening out 800 North a little bit, doing some other adjustments that way. I've got engineering back here, if they've got any other deals working on the side.
As I recall, this was in the plan that Mr. Smoot presented to us perhaps a year ago.
Right, and Dave Decker helped me here, but I believe that the street was never paid for by the city. Because we can't sell it back to them. Dave, you want to clarify that?
Yeah, maybe just restate that.
So, for instance, the paradigm is we sold a couple of streets downtown and collected money for those.
Yes.
And the question is, why didn't we on this? If you could
Yes, so some of these streets have in fact been dedicated by a developer as part of the subdivision development. And so those have typically just been returned to the adjacent property owners as they've been vacated. Other streets that have been part of our official Provo City platting that weren't dedicated by ownership have in fact been sold to adjacent properties. And what we'll later be seeing with this hospital project is 940 North, in fact, one of those streets that falls into the latter category.
Where we owe free title.
It isn't part of this vacation.
It is not part of this vacation.
That's the street with the traffic signal.
Yes.
On Fifth West.
Yes.
So in short, developer develops it and dedicated those to the city as part of the development, and the city never paid for those. Is it in code or is it just?
Well, another way of thinking about this is remember that dedications are essentially an alternative for impact fees, right? So they dedicated the property to us in lieu of fees, in the sense that it was they were doing that because their development would have an impact, potentially have an impact on the city, and the city would need to develop it. If we don't develop it, but keep the property and profit from it, then we would essentially undermine why they dedicated it to us in the first place, and are probably running foul of all kinds of previous judicial decisions. We basically coerced them to give us the property and then sell it. Is one way of it. Thank you.
So some of it has to do with the way we receive title, right? Is major. And as far as the grid, as far as utility easements in there, if we vacate the property, are we vacating our easements as well that we have that might affect the grid? Is that a possibility?
Right now, they're just being relocated in some instances. I don't think anything's being totally vacated out of this plat, as I recall.
We are actually vacating utility easements on these streets that are included.
Oh, okay, streets.
But there are other utilities within the property, utility easements within the property.
So we still will have access to what we need to maintain that grid.
Their main power line goes through that area that serves the hospital, so they would need to be.
Yes, their intention is that they will come back with a later plat that will dedicate all of the permanent easements when their final plan is completed.
But the sewer and the water utilities that are in the streets, when we vacate the street, we're also giving up those utilities in those streets. Because ultimately there's buildings and some other things that will end up.
And that doesn't affect things up the line or down the line?
Not in these cases. There is one street, is at 300 West, that will continue to go through this area, and that is not included in the street vacation. The hospital is planning around that.
Just lots of private ownerships on that street, and so that they need those utilities.
That's where we have main water and sewer running from the north to the south on that street.
And you will need to access those, and they put it if they ever have a break. It's underneath the building, well, it's gonna be parking lot, right?
Right. It's gonna still be accessible via.
In this parking lot.
Right.
Anything further? Now, to understand this item then will appear on our next council meeting agenda. Need a motion to move it? Thank you. And the next item then, Mr. Maxfield, a discussion on a request for a text amendment to Provo City Code 14.34.17 to eliminate the street frontage requirements for a lot owned by a public entity or public utility and used exclusively for public purposes.
This request was made by Questar Gas. They have a regulator station that needs to be located in an area which is impossible to meet the frontage requirements of the city ordinance, where they have to have the 40-foot frontage on a public street. And so what they've requested is there be a means to vary or waive that requirement. The Planning Commission, when they received this, there was a negative staff recommendation from our CRC committee, feeling that that might allow it to be kind of widespread. The Planning Commission, looking at it, saw that there is a variance that's now allowed for by the Board of Adjustment, and is trying to make it too complicated. But there are, through Title 15 rather than 14, which is the zoning ordinance is 14, subdivision ordinance is 15. There are provisions made in that for the Planning Commission to grant variances, not the Board of Adjustment. And so the Planning Commission looked at merely replacing the Board of Adjustment review with the Planning Commission review. So there still would be a review, and then staff also added at least some of the things they would look at in making that determination. But it wouldn't just be, you know, someone coming in and saying, I want to do this as a public utility, not have that frontage. They'd have to show that there really aren't viable options available otherwise. And this specific site is between State Street and Columbia Lane is about, see, I'm trying to 1,500 north, somewhere from there. Any questions?
Likewise, read your agenda.
Questions, comments? I assume that the original reasons for the minimum 40-foot frontage requirement had to do with public safety.
Right, it was getting access to the sites. It guaranteed the access. There's still an easement they would have to record, you know, to show their access to the site. The public emergency vehicles getting to sites that they, you know, is pretty well dedicated through there. The only problem with that frontage requirement, it does not require your access to go through the frontage requirement, which is unique. But you could have frontage requirement and your access road go on a completely different site on the project if you really designed it.
That's happened several times.
It has happened. It exists now. You know, there are a couple of other sites where this has come into play. The Google Fiber had one by Joaquin Village. You know, was trying to relocate one of their buildings there. I know we ran into that situation. I think we got that solved otherwise. But, you know, there are situations that occur occasionally. But I think for the most part, we would always be able to push the frontage requirement.
Do I understand what you said? Do I understand correctly that what this would in effect accomplish is turning to the Planning Commission the authority to waive the frontage requirements as opposed to having it reside with the Board of Adjustment?
Correct. They can basically look at things which have numbers to them. You know, you're varying that number. And I believe the justification is strong too, in the sense that you're looking at the site plan issue, which normally planning commissions approve it anyway. So it would stand to reason that they would look at changes in the site plan requirements, and then the appeal body then becoming the Board of Adjustment. Right now, appeal body, the Board of Adjustment goes to district court, so that gives that other way to look at it.
This is an item that will appear on the future council meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Mansfield. Mr. Holmes. Discussion on a proposed resolution for funding relative to a citywide retail strategy study. This matter will appear on the council meeting agenda Steve?
If you go look with the screen, please, if you go look at the screen in case we use the whiteboard.
Oh, yes, you bet. That's
Doesn't take the camera.
Yes, that would be good.
Council members, I know our time is brief. I just wanted to go over a few items. The first one is kind of what we're asking for, and it's really two-pronged. The first is to fund a retail study, to do a retail strategy. We are in the process, the city, the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, did a request for proposal. We had 7 companies or entities submit on that. 4 from out of state, 3 what we would call local. Next week we will be interviewing 4 of those. I will say if a council member would like to be a part of that process, it would be a little daunting to have all of you there and a couple staff members, but if the council chair wanted to make a selection and appoint someone, either be on the panel or in the room just listening to the presentations, we would certainly welcome that opportunity. We are in a little bit of a position. We recognize we've asked for a big chunk of money, $125,000. Frankly, the range that the high proposal is about $118,000. The low was about $30,000. If that causes the council some stress, you can postpone this until the first week of October. Our economy will not stop. Promise, we'll keep it going. It would just be helpful as we sit down with the consultant that they know the project has been funded. That always makes consultants a little nervous if there hasn't been actual money allocated. So it is on your item, council item tonight. If you wish to go forward, that's great. If you want to postpone it until your first meeting in October, we're good either way. But that was the purpose of asking for the higher amount. Obviously, if we choose someone in the $40,000 to $50,000 range, we'd only be asking for $40,000 or $50,000. So if that was a question for any of you, we'd be happy to. But the other request is to engage in a policy discussion about our retail strategy and how retail affects Provo and its bottom line as far as our budget and the general fund. We anticipate that there will be some policy decisions or opportunities to discuss this more just from our own internal discussion, but then after the consultant has done their work, that they will come back to us and then have some recommendations that we should not just full scale accept, but we should talk about and debate them and see if that's what we want to do. The reason I mention that is any number of recommendations could come back. Could be a recommendation of what you have is great, don't do anything, or we can spend a lot of money and we can try for these results with varying opportunities of return on that investment, and that again would be worth discussion and truly as a policy discussion. And the other part of what this retail strategy will help us with is to establish a realistic expectation of what our current picture looks like. We can tell you what the dollars look like right now. John Corrigan, the finance department, tracks that very well with from the state tax commission. But looking into the future, what can we realistically expect? Oftentimes, our office gets, and maybe you get this too, how come we don't have a crate and barrel in Provo? I'd love to have a crate and barrel in Provo. Unfortunately, our demographic just doesn't support a crate and barrel in Provo, and there are other realities that we need to face with what we are and what we are not, and then kind of own it. And then if we can make some incremental differences, then let's do that too. So that's a little bit of what we'd like to do. And as I mentioned in the memo in your staff in the staff report, hopefully you got that. We're doing good now. I mean, to be sure, sales tax revenue actually has been on the increase. We've had some higher years in the past. We think those were a bit of anomalies, but as we look, if you look around and drive through the community and you didn't know what any of the numbers were, you would probably share similar concerns that I do, and maybe you've even heard from constituents saying, wow, East Bay looks a little bit like a ghost town. And we have, and frankly, unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. There's probably, obviously, Kmart will be leaving. That's been pretty public. You've seen the signs. There's a couple other retailers in East Bay specifically that will be leaving, that will have a new store built elsewhere in another community. And so things like that will be happening, and we need to be prepared for that. So one of the things that I think we face, not think, but that we do face, you guys like cranberry, no black, eh? That's okay.
It's fruity.
Yeah.
Do these work better? I want to get you a black one.
Good. Cranberry's fine.
Okay, so if you look at our retail picture, Provo, this is Utah County, so Provo gets a slice of that. Yeah, I can't see.
This is duplicated in every whiteboard across the city. This is actually, this room, I think, is under administrative.
Their budget approval is right here.
Monitoring of all ink. It has a writer on the survey.
Very good. So a couple things could happen. This is, the city's portion of what we get, and it's interesting of what we get. A portion of that is just our local residents that are doing some shopping. Okay, and then there's I don't want to call them outsiders, but it's basically everything else. People coming from Spanish Fork, Richfield, those thriving metropolises that are huge, right? I mean, but we do depend on, and Provo has always depended on those outside sales. There are a couple things that are happening. Our locals.
This pertains strictly to sales tax.
This is strictly sales tax. Some of our locals aren't being able to find, so for example, Provo does not have a standalone sporting goods store. You can buy a baseball or a bat in Provo, but we don't have one that you could just go to and like a Big Five or whatever. And our residents will also step over $1 to pick up a dime. We're pretty cost conscious, so if they know that if they can buy cereal for a nickel cheaper in Orem or in Spanish Fork, there's a very good chance that that's where they'll go to make that purchase. The other thing with everything else with the outside shoppers is a lot of those shoppers are now finding those goods and services in their own communities. Where someone in Payson or Spanish Fork used to maybe drive into Sam's Club or Costco in Orem, they're now finding that in their own community, and so fewer people are coming into our community. And so with this strategy, what we're hoping to do is provide some of those local goods and services in our own community and continue to provide the draw from those outer communities to come into Provo to continue to shop, which then benefits our local shops. But the pie is, and this is back to some of the policy discussion, the pie is not necessarily getting massively bigger. So if we were to increase our take of the pie, we've now effectively taken a little bit from Orem or Spanish Fork, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's where it's coming from, unless it's coming from growth. And growth will continue to happen in the county, but only a portion of that we're going to be able to capture. So again, there shouldn't be any, and again, part of the study will help us establish those realistic expectations. And that's part of what this study will do, because again, we're not going to suddenly double our sales tax revenue based on what a consultant's going to tell us. So to put that as an example, in order to raise an additional $1 million for our general fund, we'd have to realize an additional $100 million in sales. And if you just look around, we're just not suddenly infusing $100 million into Utah Valley, and that we would get all of that. So that, again, that's part of the reality of what we're looking for. And so part of the question comes to this is how much of the pie do we really want and at what cost will it come to us? Do we want to get into the sales tax incentive game as there has been in other communities? Spanish Fork now has a Costco. Anecdotally, we're told they will get absolutely no revenue from the Costco itself. They will get revenue from those smaller stores that locate around it. When the city was entertaining the Target deal out at Southgate with the purchase of the Nature Sunshine property, it was going to take close to 20 years to recoup the $3 million purchase of land and then giving it to Target. Now, there are some things that we could do that would say, well, that still makes sense to do that. And one of those things is if we don't maintain what we have, we will start to slip backwards. So if we can't assist them all, bring in additional retail, then we will start to. But I've already talked too much. So the request is for funding the retail strategy, and then some policy decisions that will come out of that. And so it would be helpful for us as staff and as the administration to know is that something that the council, is that a direction that you would like us to see go? And
so part of your master goal.
Okay, so a little confusion there. So recently we finished the citywide economic development strategic plan, which was primarily focused on job growth, wealth creation projects and developments. It had a little bit of retail, but the primary purpose was not to go into the retail portion of it. It was really on, and in traditional sense, economic development is job growth. It's not retail. That just kind of happens. Some places it happens a little bit more depending on what they go after. So.
I had two questions. One is, do these consultants that we're interviewing, do they have examples that they have been able to show of where they've gone into multiple cities and done a study and retail sales have increased by X percentage?
Yeah, well, any good consultant will tell you what great things that they've done for somebody else, and that will be part of the interview process. But again, part of that realistic expectation, at least from my opinion, is helping us know what we can and can't do that would be realistic. Because again, talking about the pie, unless you actually are bringing more shoppers into the community, and again, Provo does not operate in a vacuum, right? I mean, so we're still subject to the national economy also. Again, if you look at our trends as where we've been in sales tax over the last 18 years, it's gone up and down, and for the last 4 years, it's been up. But that was down from 2006, 7, and 8. Were some very high years, but as you can imagine, 9 and 10 were low, and then we've been growing since then. And again, it's helping establish some of that expectation, not just so we can answer the question of why we don't have a crate and barrel, but what can we realistically do about it? And it's going to be marginal. It's going to be incremental on the edges. It's not going to be a sudden doubling of our retail offerings and the revenue. But it will give us hopefully some realistic things of what we can do. And then do we have the appetite to then implement those recommendations?
Why the discrepancy between the bid amounts from 30 to 118? Is it in-state versus out-of-state, or is it like student-driven with how you view this?
Yeah. So.
What do you see as the discrepancy between bid amounts?
So part of that is going to be driven by. Like I'll just circulate that for you if you want to take a look at that. Those are the companies and the bid amounts. One company was going to spend the Hyatt company, the 118, they were going to take 6 months to do this. The others were going to be 3 months. Yeah, so amount of work that was done. Some consultants have a higher opinion of themselves than others. Frankly, they will charge more because they feel they can and they're able to. There was obviously some of them that were just going to be doing more work. I don't know if you necessarily get twice the outcome for twice the price, and that's part of the interview process, is just to hear what they have to say and to see if we can get a feel for what it is that they're proposing.
One way to view this is this is complementary is a basic focus of your long-range strategic plan.
Yes.
Economic development. And we can think of this as essentially amenities to promote growth in terms of people moving into the area, taking jobs here, and so on, just focus the economy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. And again, oftentimes quality of life, one of the segments, not the complete segment or the complete picture, but one heavy dose of our quality of life is the ability to buy goods and services locally that you would desire, and so that you don't have to drive to the next community to buy those. That's perceived as, yeah, I can get it locally.
Bond election with sushi bonds is another example of an amenity that we can provide those who might be attracted to areas and places that work.
So the highest amount is clearly an outlier in the group. Are they, and it's going to be twice the work, but that's still more than twice the amount of the next highest.
Yeah,
so what else goes into that?
So we don't want to be completely swayed by the dollar amount. We'd actually like to hear the presentation, what they have to offer, and then, you know, it could very well be worth $118,000 to hire that particular firm. But we won't know that until we've had an opportunity to talk with them. And an often question that we get is, well, what's the budget for this? And we typically defer, say it has not been determined yet, because we don't want to completely bind ourselves and make it, you know, the value, or not the value, but the cost of the actual services being provided.
But it will be determined.
Eventually it will be determined.
Oh, but if we allocate it tonight, it'll be determined.
That's why we asked for 125 to mask that a little bit of what that is. But again, by making that determination, whether it's tonight or in 3 weeks, we are hoping to go for whoever is best, not for the highest dollar amount.
And when are the interviews taking place?
Monday and Tuesday of next week.
Okay.
Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning.
What's the most recent precedent you think of this kind of action? We are, as a municipal council, approving expenditure from the general fund for administrative projects, and doing so with kind of highest ceiling.
John, I prefer you on that one.
What we actually propose, and what the way the resolution is stated, is that whatever bid is selected, that's the amount that will be appropriated. So the plan is not to appropriate the full amount and then economic development have some extra money to spend on other projects. The way it's worded is that we would just appropriate what's actually awarded with the bid.
Up to 225,000?
Up to 100. Well, and the highest bid's 117.
118.
So that's the highest. So we could actually, it should be revised to say that being the ceiling, because it's going to be higher than that.
Well, again, what we'd like to have is the flexibility to, as we sit down, one of the things that we did not put in the request for proposal, which at least my understanding the council is interested in, is some potential neighborhood retail, of dispersing that a little bit. If I'm wrong on that, let me know. But again, as we sit down and say, okay, this is what your proposal was, now we'd like to sit down and negotiate on this. It could go up, it could go down. Maybe they've offered some things that we're not interested in, and again, looking for flexibility. Again, if it causes the council grief, I would rather have you wait on that, let us make the selection and come back for a specific dollar amount. It's not going to make or break my evening.
You know, it appears 6 of them are between 23,000 and 45,000, and then one of them is 118,000. So it appears that, you know, most of there's a greater probability that it's going to be substantially less than what you're asking for.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I think that maybe I would feel more comfortable waiting until there was a proposal that they had accepted or that they wanted to accept before we make a recommendation on appropriating the budget.
Something to speak on the other side.
A question, how much would the needle have to move attributed to this study, like in a percentage sales tax increase, say, over the next 10 years, for
for this to have been a good investment. I don't know if you looked at it that way, but.
Well, I think that's probably a question that we will collectively determine the answer to that. I mean, is it worth it to, again, they're going to make some recommendations, the consultant will make some recommendations, and then we will have to determine if we want to, I mean, whatever, I can't imagine a recommendation coming back that's not going to cost a little something.
So I'm not sure that was his question.
No. So coming back to that then, so how much do we need to make this worth it?
Yeah.
I don't have a defined number for that.
Well,
But
I think I understand the question is, if we increase, let's suppose we spend $60,000 on this, then according to Dix's formula of 100 million brings it $1 million. We've got to go over a period of time, raise $600,000 to break even on the study.
Yeah. Yes, you want to.
That's your question.
Yeah.
And you could say, oh, in the first year, or over 60,000 per year for 10 years.
Okay, but again, part of, so John has a comment, but go ahead, John, I'll come back to mine.
Yeah, actually what happens with the state formula is we get 0.5%. We collect 1%, but then they distribute half of it based on population and half of it based on point of sale. So if the study costs us $40,000 and we get 0.5 cent on each cell, we would have to sell $8 million over the next 10 years to pay for the study. That's what you bring in the revenue.
Maybe find some happy space for the council.
Yes.
The breakoff was about 60,000. Is that where the others start coming in?
It's actually 45.
So if the council were to approve $50,000 or something that would allow Dixon to move forward with everybody but one of them, and then if for some reason there's some magic in the 118 that he wants to come back and justify, that would allow him to come back. Otherwise, give him the green light in a more comfortable zone.
Does that threat prospect?
Well, again, the consultant's going to have to decide at some point, are they still interested or not? I mean, they have to make a business decision too on it. And I can't imagine that consultants, if every project was absolutely funded that they ever went for, then there'd probably be fewer consultants working in that arena. So again, I think it's just the reality of what it is. I think consultants are used to.
What would you tell them if they found out about tonight's action? It's at 50,000. What would you tell them if they called and asked about it?
I would tell them that we've been funded up to that amount, and if we find value in going on a higher amount, that we're entirely comfortable going back, and if they're no longer interested, then we believe we have more than just one qualified entity proposing on this, and if one is unwilling to work under those conditions, then we're comfortable moving to the other. But again, just as a reminder as to why we're doing, part of this is to establish, again, those expectations of what we realistically can accomplish, recognizing in using that $100 million example, they could propose the greatest things and we could implement them, but if the dollar amounts are not in the community, we're not going to get ahead of the market. And so again, this is to help us really, so for you as elected officials to say, this is what we can realistically expect as far as the general fund is concerned. Again, remember that the other funds operate independently of that, but you still have to have the value and the cash flow in the community to generate the money, whether it's from utility sales, property tax, or sales tax revenue.
So if we were to set the sum at 50,000, moving it down for 125, we would in essence be saying, first of all, we're not in any way binding ourselves as a council, because you'll be returning for something for a specific amount. But at the same time, we'd be going on record as favoring this kind of move on the part of the administration, the council,
Yeah.
and its future. So there's something said for assertive proactive communication measures.
So you asked whether I would comment on the other side of the argument. So I think that this team that's going to be interviewing them is going to be looking very carefully at, is this group really worth more than 2 times the other? So I'm comfortable giving them that option. Maybe this group has been successful with 3 times the number of cities, has more examples they can go to. That's my thought.
My only thought is that I don't go to a used car dealer and say, I'm interested in this car, how much is it worth? How much you get? He won't, if you ask me how much I have in my wallet, it happens to be the same amount. I'm still not sure I'm getting the right deal. So I kind of lean towards a smaller amount, but with the, again, saying, I feel comfortable with the direction that you're going, and should we need more?
So leaving the door open.
Yeah.
Right. So, which of us here would like to be part of the interview? Including staff.
Go ahead. What day is that?
So it's Monday. Let me tell you what our so that's going to be the 22nd, and we have set aside Monday afternoon from 1 to 4, and Tuesday morning, the 23rd.
In the afternoon and Tuesday.
I'm available until 4 on Monday, but it's up to you.
And Tuesday?
On Tuesday, I'm open.
It wouldn't be a bad thing to have 2 members.
Yeah, again, if you all showed up, it might be a little awkward, but awkward we deal with in Provo, right?
We'd have to notice it. So that's
Even a Facebook group for it. Provo awkward.
Where do we meet?
We're going to be in our conference room, I believe. Actually, in the mayor's office.
If you run out of room, you can move to ours.
Or you may be over here before it's over.
If I could just take a second longer, many of you know Dave Oka left to go to West Jordan, and I'd like to introduce Scott Bowles in our office. Scott is a new member of our staff. It actually just provided some information, some more deep background for you that's been provided to Matt, who can then disseminate it to you as a council. Some of the things I asked Scott to do, in particular to East Bay, and looking at our own demographic, and some other information that Provo has a pretty high level of poverty as it's defined by federal standards, which poverty in Provo is not the same as poverty in Detroit. I mean, so we understand that most of the people that are in that level, a good portion of them are going to continue to move up. But it's also very telling as we talk about East Bay in particular. It's got some real challenges, partly because there are not many housetops around it. And the housetops that are around it tend to be at the lower level and at higher percentages as you compare those. So again, Scott's provided us some information. I would encourage you to take a look at that to be a part of your collective picture as we look at what Provo is and is not as we consider moving forward with this retail strategy of what we have to work with.
Provided the information
Through an email for you for just background reading on some of the relative to some of our own in-house work as the consultant, as we anticipate bringing a consultant.
All of your email of introduction.
Yes.
Hiring.
Yes.
And then you send something subsequent to that.
I said so.
Send it to Matt, and then Matt will, then Matt will then send it back to the council. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome. We're already saying Dave who. Is that good?
Any other questions we can answer relative to the retail strategy?
So you are accepting of our amendment to the original.
Oh, yeah.
$25,000.
Yeah, we're good there. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mayor Curtis, briefly, give you an update on the RDA position. Stephen probably can give you a better update than I can for the interviews. We had some great candidates apply. That has been narrowed down to a small selection. And I will be holding interviews with those next week in November, the following Monday. As soon as I have a chance to meet with all of them, I think we'll move hopefully rather quickly and make a decision. Bill left, but I asked his permission. He sent an official notice and withdrew his name from the consideration. I view that both as a good thing and a bad thing. He's very talented, but it's great to have him where he is. So as long as we have him in the city, I think we're happy with what he's doing. Stephen, I don't know if you had anything to that.
No, the candidates were very high quality, and I think that you have a good selection to choose from.
And I believe that's all we have. Wayne is at a conference. I don't know where he was at.
No.
He's took vacation a week ago and did a very un-Wayne-like thing to do. He came home and left again. We're just Corey and I have the duct tape out over there.
We pray every morning.
It's helping us realize how important it is to the organization. He'll be back tomorrow, actually in the office Thursday.
Any further commentary on the scavenger?
Huge success from everybody's perspective. I know a couple of you were there. I may have missed some of the others. There were so many people there. And Google Fiber spent a rather large amount of money promoting it, and it from all purposes, it appeared as if it was a city event. We got pretty much the credit for doing it. And over 2,000 people in the downtown area coming into stores, out of stores, in the rec center, out of the rec center. And everybody I talked to, I asked everybody I encountered if they were having fun. Unanimously was, this is a fabulous thing. There's talk of trying to do it next year, sans the world record. I don't think we try to beat that again. But just that concept of getting people into the downtown, going from store to store, was really a lot of fun.
A good boost for downtown Provo.
You know, yes, and very much. And they would be probably the ones with the city that would pick up the slack from Google Fiber if we try to get that next year.
You know that they don't tell you, but the 20th is coming up really fast. Are we having any more events? We're getting to the point here where
I think everybody's feeling that we have exhausted the city. They will come and go, and those who didn't do it. I don't know how anybody could say they didn't have an opportunity.
it's the Google's last day to sign up to
Oh,
20th.
last day to sign up. Oh, yeah. I was just gonna give another plug for the treasure hunt. It's not a treasure hunt, it's a culture. Yeah, it was so fun for all ages. I mean, I had my 8-year-old up to a friend and our kids, and it was just really fun for all ages and really well planned. I thought it was organized and really well planned and super fun. I think that there was a big motivating factor though with the set the record. I think that's why you got the turnout that you did. Not that you wouldn't get a good turnout, but I think that's why Google, I don't know, we pay homage to it. That was definitely part of the reason why I think the numbers turned out.
I don't know what they spent, but it was a very large amount of money to get those numbers there.
Yeah.
And then their after party.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't get that.
Was it part of their promotion? Yeah, people signed up for it.
It was mostly a give back to the community. They signed up a few people, but we just didn't have much information at all. It was mostly, hey, it's been a long haul to get here. The deadline's almost here. Thanks. It's our community.
What was the final numbers? I have it.
2079.
2079. The record doubled, but more than doubled.
The winners finished in like 20 minutes.
Yes.
So they came back dripping wet.
So there was a group of people that came in with construction vests on. And I had another contestant come up and say, so what is that? they had passports in their hand. I think they're contestants. That was the group that won.
They were? Yeah, it took us almost 2 hours. We sort of meandered, and my daughter on
It
crutches.
took me 3 hours to walk from Convention Center to Pioneer Park and back to the Convention Center.
My daughter and her husband took fourth place. They
Really?
were speeding like crazy. They were very surprised that there were people with strollers and older people there ahead of them that got some of those early categories.
Of course, you have a pretty high interception rate.
There was,
Well, yeah, with one of the items being picture with the mayor, a selfie with the mayor, and he couldn't really walk without somebody wanting a selfie.
there were ad-lib moments like a splash pad over the Pioneer Park. Just all of a sudden became almost part of the contest to go in there and get wet. People were just having fun in the downtown area. It was perfect weather, right temperature to be outside. It's so delicious. I stopped by there, and Kevin, the owner and manager, had this list of people that come by. It was pages long. He was doing a hashtag on everyone came by. There were businesses like that that benefited immediately because of the impulse buy. And then businesses that towns came in where they just had hundreds of people coming in.
I'm curious to know what their sales were that day, because we ended up buying So Delicious, and we ended up buying canned food from Smith's to turn into a food bank thing, and so I wonder how it benefited some of
I've
them.
asked Mike to kind of get me some of that information and stuff,
That would be good to
try
know.
to reach out, so I'll let you know as soon as he gets back with me. But even he said that there's, Gurus, for example, people weren't going in there buying food, but they're going in there buying drinks. And your money on a drink is significant, so they were loving it, but I don't know if the Pioneer necessarily did anything, but just to get people in the door.
There's a new business next to Pioneer, Foxglove. It's a flower shop. I've been talking to the property owner or the business owner for a couple months. He wasn't part of the event, but his expectations were far exceeded for just random people walking into his business and checking out what he had.
Well, I mentioned the last rooftop concert series is October 3rd. It's their 5th anniversary. They're putting on a kind of special evening. If you haven't been to one, if you haven't enjoyed, this would be a really nice one to go to. Fictionist and the Aces are the groups that will be performing. It's actually, Gary, due to the generosity of New Skin going to come off the roof, they think there'll be way too many people. And being the band will be set up on the New Skin property.
Center Street, Plaza, New Skin Plaza area.
We'll close down. It's a little bit of an experiment. It's possible they've outgrown the rooftop.
It was almost a safety hazard last time I was there.
So I have a good friend named Carl Bateman. He's the first cousin who's an engineer. I called him in the past and he said, talk to me about this parking deck. I could have come down and we've actually, the city's hired an engineer to come and look at that. He attended this one and he said, after he attended, he said, it's not the parking deck you have to worry about, it's the railings.
It's the what?
Railings.
Oh, well, just the sheer number of people up there is almost impossible to get out if you need to.
It's out.
But it's also express our thanks to Louise and Karen and helpers for a delightful gathering last week with neighborhood chairs.
Yes.
I invite a motion to adjourn.
Are we closing this after? Are we moving to a close?
No, we have no closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?